Okay. I think my mic was off on one of the settings. I'm trying some new things today, so it's real interesting. So I apologize. But like I said, this is Dr. T. Hasan Johnson. If you're not familiar, this is the Onyx Report, where we uplift Black men and boys using critical analysis. Um, Let me see. So YouTube is telling me they cannot hear me. Still, uh, they cannot hear me. Okay, I can hear me on YouTube. Okay, there we go. Sound is good. All right. I know, Gigi. I know. I was copying you. But anyway, this is the Onyx Report, as I said. So we are looking to critically analyze the lives of Black men and boys for the purpose of uplifting them. So we are on that tip, and I see some of the people here. We're broadcasting from a number of places, as I was saying a moment ago. We're on innerlightradio.com. We are on YouTube, of course. Good looking out, Grinch. Appreciate the support. So we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, and we are also on Instagram. So I see a few people coming through. What's up, Lady J? Good to see you. Dr. Neil coming through. So I see a few people on Instagram. So we're trying that out. What's up, Officer Faulkner? All right. So we got a lot going on today, and there's a lot that we need to talk about. So we need to get that going and make sure that we are all on the same page. Let me start out by thanking my subscribers. You can subscribe to my channel, and I will tell you a little bit about that in a second. As far as YouTube is concerned, I'm going to go ahead and play my honor scroll and support and appreciation of support. What's up, Miss Kalila? Good to see you. Norm. So here we go. All right. So again, shout out to my subscribers. You can become a subscriber to the channel by going to YouTube, and you can go ahead and click the subscribe button right next to I think it's the join button. Let me make sure I'm getting my thing right. So oh, they don't show me because it's my channel. Anyway, so there's a number of ways to support the channel. And through YouTube, you can become a gold level or diamond level member, and there are 3 levels above that as well. Each one comes with perks. So you can go to YouTube, sign on to that. And one of the perks that comes with being a member is that we have an after show every Wednesday. So after this, we will have an after show that is exclusive to my supporters. So you can come through and support that way. You can also support on Patreon. Go to patreon.com and you can support there. And that's at patreon.com/TH Johnson. And you can either support the Institute for Black Male Studies, or you can support the film review series that I do that is principally for parents of Black sons. Good looking out, Urban Warlock. Appreciate the support. And you can donate, of course, on Patreon, on Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or through Super Chat on YouTube. So there's a lot of ways to support the show. So I hope that you do, so that we can keep this kind of thing going. And we can definitely make sure that the information that's out there is representing Black men the way it needs to be, right? So shout out to Prophet of Thought. I see you in here. BK Hammer, what's up? J3, Barry Little, what's going on? Malika, Golden Leopard, Damon, what's going on, man? Taylor, Ron, we got a few people in here. Shop Talk, good to see you. Y'all make sure you support Shop Talk Live on YouTube. He broadcasts every Sunday, but he is also taking over a comic book spot in the Bay Area. So go to his channel and support that. Please make sure, because we got to definitely support Black business, and most particularly those who are pushing the boundaries. So make sure you support the brother. As I said, Gigi's in here, so good to see you in here. Support the Green Gorilla on YouTube as well as Grinch. Support him as well. Officer Faulkner, Charles Faulkner. Thanks for the support. Mega Montana, Cameron, what's going on? Urban Warlock, appreciate the support. So a lot going on. And we are going to try and get to as much of it as possible and keep all of these different plates spinning. Just this past Saturday, I did a show on Black Talk Radio, I think it is. And I hope you can support that. That was with Janice Graham, Our Common Ground. So you can go to Blog Talk Radio. I think I call it Black Talk. It should be, though. But anyway, go to Blog Talk Radio and look that up. Our Common Ground with Janice Graham. We did an interview Saturday. You might enjoy. What's up, Sir Anthony? Art of Fort. What's going on? So a lot of good things happening, and we're trying to keep it that way, right? But at the end of the day, we're going to keep it moving because that's what we do. We don't have a choice, really, because there's too much going on in the world that needs to be handled. All right. Also, I've been doing a lot of interviews lately, and I got a lot more coming for you. And that's on the Institute for Black Male Studies website. You can go to instituteforblackmalestudies.com. And if you click on store, Michael, appreciate that support on the Cash App. If you go to click store in the menu, you can see the options available to you. So we have the Intro to Black Male Studies course that's going on right now. You can sign into. There's a 3-part webinar on misunderstanding Black men, manhood, and misplaced social expectation. And then there are a number of actually free options as well. Got an interview with, all kinds of stuff going on. Dang. Oh, my whole system just tripped out for a second. Man, my apologies. Anyway, we had an interview with Carnell Smith, an interview with Dr. William Smith out of University of Utah, and of course, an interview with one Kevin Samuels. And I think you'll enjoy all three. All you got to do is go ahead and click on them, submit your email address so we can reach out to you. And then you can go ahead and watch the interview. So I think with any of those three, you'll find quite a bit there that you'll enjoy. So just make sure you support and check that out. Right. You can also go, as you'll see in a minute. Adam, appreciate the Cash App. You can also go to the merchandise area of the Institute website, and you can see plenty of the stuff up there. So I'll probably mention that in a little bit. But anyway, so make sure you do that as we try and get it together here. All right. So let's see. All right. So y'all know what I like to do every week. I break my show up into segments. And one of the things that we always start with is the Sacred Black Masculine series. And basically what that is it's a series that deals with supporting and celebrating Black men. At the end of the day, that's one of the things that we are fervently serious about, and that is making sure that Black men, their acknowledgement, their accolades, their accomplishments, and of course the sacrifices they make are properly regarded, especially when society tends to forget what Black men do. So slowly but surely, we like to acknowledge them. And this is an organic process. It kind of comes as it comes. I actually don't even have to go out and look for it. It's just, as I see them, I just save them up and come up here and share them with you guys. Right. But this one we're starting out with is about one brave young man, as a matter of fact, named Jaden Groves. He's 11 years old and he is a hero, and he's being acknowledged in St. Louis at the fire department for his sacrifice, his heroism, actually. And one of the things he does is in August of 2020, during a family gathering, Jaden's 22-month-old brother wandered away. He realized his baby brother wasn't nearby and went looking for him. He thought about the things that his brother loved to play with, and went straight to the pond that was nearby. His brother loved water. The baby boy was found by Jaden face down in the water and unresponsive. Jaden immediately jumped in, grabbed his brother out of the water, and pulled him up onto the grass. He then ran to the firehouse that was near and alerted first responders. The firefighters immediately jumped into action, and they were able to save his brother. So Again, we like to acknowledge black males around here. So shout out to Jaden for saving your little brother, man. That's what's up. Right. Okay. Next up, let me see if we can. There we go. Oh, there we go. So next up, we have this gentleman here. His name is Akori Hanzo. I may have mispronounced that, but I believe it is Akori Hanzo in Philly. And what he does is he develops black figurines. He sculpts them. Hanzo was inspired after attending an event where he got to see a number of figurines. He started collecting them, and he wanted to include black characters and celebrities in his own collection. But when he searched for them, he couldn't find any. So he bought sculpting supplies to create his own while working on an administrative job. He said, I started sculpting at my desk every day, 42-year-old Hanzo said. As it evolved, I started to think, what if we had pieces that were made off our history? Everybody has had some type of toy figurine when they were a kid. So when different generations see these pieces, they can connect. It also sparks a conversation about our race, our history, and our imagery. From there, he went on to create figurines of dozens of noteworthy black folk, from Maya Angelou to Jean-Michel Basquiat to Whoopi Goldberg to Notorious B.I.G. He was already a painter and a graphic designer, but it is the sculpting work that now defines his artistic practice. Hanzo's figurines are considered artworks and cost at least $1,600. Each figurine is handmade and takes several months to complete. You can find that on Inquirer.com. Akori is spelled Acori, Akori Hanzo. So look that brother up. Shout out to him. All right. What's up? It's me, C. What's up, Sir Anthony? Charles Faulkner. We got a few people in here. Big heavy hitter. What's going on? So we are slowly but surely keeping it moving. And as y'all know, I like to do, we are supporting black men. And right now we are celebrating whom I call the sacred black masculine, right? Shout out to the high school principal working night shifts at Walmart and donating his check to the students, his students in need. Right, this is in North Charleston, South Carolina. Moved by need to help his students, a South Carolina high school principal took on a part-time job at Walmart and donated his check to those in need. A couple of years ago, he had two students, he said, who were females sleeping under a bridge. There was another situation where a former student and her daughter were sleeping in their car. And another situation where a former student needed funds for her water and light bills. Understanding the bigger picture, Darby took action. He started working at Walmart 3 nights a week, stocking shelves from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Said, I was taught if your hands find something to do, do it. So I came to myself and said, perhaps I need another job in terms of part-time. Ebo Sosa, appreciate that support, man. He said, so from there, his decision to stand and deliver has led to about $100,000 in donations from all over the country. And since the story went viral, Walmart donated $50,000 to North Charleston High School. So shout out to the brother here. Let me see. Yeah, so that is Principal Darby in South Carolina, right? So peace to him. And that is the kind of sacrifice that black men have made for generations, even though today we don't talk about those sacrifices. We ignore them, and we pretty much argue that black men do nothing. All right, heavy hitter. Good to see you become a member of the Onyx Brotherhood. Thank you. Good to have you. All right. Let's see. All right. There we go. So we're moving. All right. So next up, we have 2 generations and 3 family members of OBGYNs, right? And this is an article that you can actually find on Atlanta Black Star, and it's actually centered around the daughter, who's the youngest of the 3, but basically it's about a father, a son, and a daughter who all became OBGYNs, and they work in the same hospital network. And the article's title is Dad Made It Possible. Family of doctors cast into spotlight after brother and sister duo team up to perform a surgery. So Dr. Crandall Chambers is the father. Dr. Wesley C. Chambers is the 36-year-old son. And Dr. Sheris Chambers is the 32-year-old daughter. And even though the article is centered around the daughter, I wanted to actually take a moment to celebrate the father. because this man basically raised his children and inspired them to become OBGYNs. And both of them have successfully done so, right? Each of them were trained at historically Black colleges and universities in their undergraduate studies. Sheris graduated from Spelman, and her brother and father both graduated from Morehouse, two institutions that are part of the Atlanta University Center complex. She believes her time spent at Spelman truly prepared her to be able to practice her skills comfortably in what's considered a white male dominated field. Both she and her brother are thankful for their father paving the way to their being able to fulfill their dreams of helping people through medicine in the community they've called home. She says, I thank my father and everyone. This is actually the son. I thank my father and everyone who has supported us and poured into us as we've grown and developed into the physicians that we are. Says, because my dad was able to open the door for us, he made it possible that we could have a family legacy. So shout out to Crandall Chambers, that's Dr. Crandall Chambers, for stepping up and inspiring his children to go further than most do. So that's a big deal. Much appreciated, right? Let me see. Next up, this is also an article off of Atlanta Black Star. And this is one Manuel Godoy. Title of the article is "We Can Really Take Over This Space." Independent Black-owned comic book publisher raises over $1 million in effort to wrangle market share from large publishing houses. Apex Prowler, appreciate the support. Right. So basically, what you have here is Godoy didn't like how Black creators in the comic book landscape were being treated by the publishing power brokers. He feels they are snubbed, overlooked, and when large publishing companies do take notice of successful Black comics, they only do so to acquire them and water down the content. Godoy makes no apologies for his no holds barred approach to dismantling the status quo. He has a social media army of 400,000 followers backing him, and he's the co-founder of Black Sands Entertainment, independent comic book publishing company that recently announced a successful WeFunder campaign that helped Black Sands raise over $1 million in 2020 alone. So later, I'm going to play a commercial for the developing documentary that our brother Green Gorilla is initiating, and I want you guys to support that. Gigi, if you're still listening, please put the link in the YouTube chat for people to support. But if this brother can raise $1 million to support the rise of Black-owned comics, then there's no reason whatsoever that we shouldn't be able to raise the 50,000 necessary for us to have a documentary that actually articulates what the Black manosphere is all about. So shout out to this brother, Manuel Godoy. Much appreciation for his work. Right. And we will go ahead and move forward. So alongside, the Black Masculine, Sacred Black Masculine, I also like to do shout outs, especially when significant. And the first of those goes to Mr. Charles Dutton. Now, this is one of my favorite actors, straight up. Charles Stanley Dutton. He turned 70 on January 30th, born in 1951. He's an actor, director, and producer, and he's best known for his television series Rock, which ran from 91 to 94. The Piano Lesson, which I play in my classes. He was absolutely brilliant in that, as well as in pretty much anything I've seen him in. He's been brilliant. He earned a Golden Globe Award nomination, 3 Primetime Emmy Awards, 3 NAACP Image Awards. Like I said, I've never seen him whack in anything I've seen him in. Matter of fact, I think one of the movies he hates the most, Alien 3, I loved mainly because he was in it and how powerful his presence has always been. So I am a true fan of Charles Dutton. As a matter of fact, you guys know I played it on the show before too. Even when he did Menace to Society, to me, the one scene that he really, just stretched his legs in, just changed the entire film. To me, he stole the movie in that scene. But that's just the kind of cat I am. It may not be the case for you, but if you look that scene up, Menace to Society, Charles Dutton, and you see the scene where he's sitting in his classroom with his son and his son's friend, it is a powerful scene, and that's the kind of thing he regularly does. So, shout out to Charles Dutton. Happy blessed solar return to you, sir. We hope to see you doing your next project, whatever that may be, soon. All right. So shout out to him. Okay. Next up, a little sad news for those who don't know. Temple University Owls men's basketball coach John Chaney died at 89 years old last Friday, I believe. He died Friday morning after a short illness. That's all they would say about it. Chaney won the NAACP, excuse me, NCAA. He won the NCAA Division II title as the head coach of Chaney State in 1978 and coached at Temple for 24 years from 1982 to 2006. He compiled a 741 to 312 record at the collegiate level and won 6 Atlantic 10 regular season titles with the Owls. He led Temple to 17 NCAA tournament appearances and advanced to the Elite Eight 5 times. 1988, the year the Owls entered the tournament as the number 1 overall seed, Chaney won Consensus Coach of the Year honors. He was inducted into the College Basketball Hall of Fame in 2006. So shout out to him, and much appreciation for his work. I went to Temple. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to see him in action, and I regret not being able to do so. But nevertheless, peace to him and his family. We appreciate your sacrifice, sir, upholding the standards of an intelligent Black masculine entity, Black man. But next up, y'all know this one was coming. Had to acknowledge her, right? Miss Cicely Tyson, groundbreaking screen and Broadway actress, dies at 96 years old, right? Cicely Tyson made history in 2018 as the first Black woman to win an honorary Oscar, which to me translates to we waited too long and she should have got one a long time ago. But nevertheless, she got what she got and it was well deserved. With a career spanning more than 60 years, Tyson never retired from the entertainment industry and was most famously known for her roles playing resilient, uplifting Black women. Okay. She starred in decades of film and television, including the notable 1972 drama Sounder, for which she received an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, and the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, which earned her 2 Emmy Awards, as well as Oldest Living Confederate Widow Tells All. In 2018, she became the first Black woman to receive an honorary Oscar. 2 years later, she was selected for the Peabody Career Achievement Award for her work on stage and film and in television. She's also scored Emmy nods for the miniseries Roots and King. Now, to be honest with you, as much as I dug about her work, is a little known film in 1981 that I loved her most in. Like it, hate it, agree with me, disagree, I don't care. I still love that movie to this day. When I see her and Richard Pryor in Bustin' Loose, that's what does it for me. So I love Cicely Tyson, appreciate her work. I was sorry to hear she passed, and I wanted to at least take a moment out to acknowledge her. She's also in one of the most recent articles she's done. She actually acknowledged Black male African American actors who have been overlooked in many different instances, especially in regard to current picks as far as major films. So she talked about that a little bit and really shouted out ADOS Black men. So shout out to her. Much appreciation for really what is generations of work. Right. Okay. Now, this shout out is a little different. This is actually coming from someone I don't know. Right. This is a sister on Facebook who put up a post that I found moving, and I wanted to shout her out. Right. This is a Zanetta Tribble, and she actually writes, "Sexual harassment is real, and is a real and inconvenient truth that happens far too often, more than what's actually reported. We oftentimes only think about this happening to women, but it happens to men too." She says, "One of my beloved brothers just reached out to me about a situation he's been going through with a woman for months, with her sending him unsolicited sexual texts and DMs at all hours of the night and morning. He has been unresponsive and asked her to stop, but she still persists. She's someone he's never been intimate with or even shown the slightest bit of interest in beyond business transactions, yet she continues to disrupt his vibration and relationship with these constant messages of what she wants to do to him and how does he like it, sending song lyrics, the list goes on. Are there others out there dealing with this? There's definitely a double standard when it's men dealing with this type of scenario. Our community needs healing on so many levels. Let's talk about it and what's the best course of action. And then she puts hashtag sexual harassment. Shout out to Zanetta for acknowledging what men go through, especially Black men. And I say especially Black men because, in terms of sex, the ongoing stereotypes regarding Black men is that we're generally hypersexual rapists and monsters and so on and so forth. That said, if you have a woman texting you, messages, lewd messages, sending you pictures, honestly, how many people believe you're innocent? To what extent does your own woman believe you're innocent? Right? That can be one of the most difficult things to deal with, is when you have unwanted attention coming from somebody, as a Black male, and yet, few people will give you the benefit of the doubt that what's happening to you is unsolicited. And it can, of course, even threaten your reputation, your job, depending on how far this person takes it. Right? You can even look at people who we've talked about here on this show over the last year and a half, or year, I would say, where there are Black men who've lost employment, lost reputations, all on the word of a woman with no evidence. So, in other words, in this kind of scenario, if this person who's messaging him, and even though he doesn't want it, if she suddenly gets upset that he doesn't respond, or if he gets upset and becomes more adamant about her stopping, and she decides to take it out on him, scores of Black men have lost employment, lost positions, and had damaged reputations due to the word of somebody who doesn't even have to provide evidence. That's one of the things that we've inherited, most particularly since the rise of Me Too. This can become extremely dangerous. So I agree with one of the people writing in, Sister Warrior, in my comment section. She says, document everything and hire an attorney, possibly to sue both the perv and the company or organization. At the very least, document everything. And I'm speaking, of course, to the brothers who are subject to this, regardless of whether or not we are acknowledged as being victims in that right. But it's a different type of victimization. It's a victimization by reputation, in a manner that can be incredibly damaging to you and your family. And again, most may not even care that this is happening to you. All right. All right, so starting up our current events, y'all know how I like to do. We got a few things to jump into, so bear with me, because there's a lot that's been happening. And last week, as you guys know, I had on attorney Dennis Sperling, as well as the paternity coach Carnell Smith, and we talked at length about paternity fraud. And if you missed that episode, you can go back and check it. We are also now podcasting on iTunes, so you can look up the Onyx Report with Dr. T. Hasan Johnson there. If podcasts work better for you, you can go ahead and listen to it there. But that three-way interview was powerful, and I skipped over a lot of the current events and whatnot for the sake of time. So we got some things to make up for. So first up, St. Peter's father dies in hospital parking lot after family says hospital refused treatment. Right. This is in St. Peter's. Right. Sadie Bell says her husband David died in the parking lot of a Barnes Jewish hospital in St. Peter's during his third time at the hospital seeking medical treatment. She says, I felt like what he was going through was urgent, and I thought that's what emergency rooms were for. She told News 4 the week of January 8th, she took her husband to the ER twice after he'd been complaining about severe chest pain. Both times, Bell said medical staff refused to admit him, only prescribing him with ibuprofen. Then David, who was also the director for Central County Fire, was rushed back to the same hospital after having difficulty breathing at work for a third time. I called his fireman because one of the firemen took him. Which hospital did you take him to? He said, I went on and took him back to Barnes Jewish because I knew that's where you all had been going. She says, oh, I wish you hadn't have done that. I wish you hadn't taken him there. And he asked, why not? She said, every time that we've taken him, all they did was give him ibuprofen and send him home. I'm really thinking they're missing something. When she got to the hospital, she said her husband was sitting outside in a wheelchair after begging doctors to run tests and admit him. She said they refused. He said, ma'am, he's already been here twice for the same thing. We've already diagnosed him From there, she said she was preparing to take him to another hospital, but it was too late. We got halfway to the car and he said, "Oh, Sadie." And I said, "Baby, what's wrong?" Belle said her husband took his last breath in the parking lot and a good Samaritan tried giving David CPR. Belle believes her husband received a lack of treatment because doctors and staff dismissed him. National medical reports state African Americans often have higher mortality rates because they don't receive the same health care as their white counterparts. She says, "I don't know what they thought, and I don't understand. I just don't understand why they wouldn't help him." Numbers of numbers from the American Medical Association show Black Americans' mortality rate is 24% higher than white Americans. One of the main contributing factors to the AMA points out is that doctors are not addressing pain levels from Black patients. Now, we've seen this, right? And I've talked about this in the last year, how there's been documentation that medical practitioners believe that Black folk are not in pain and don't experience pain the way whites do. And that has had an impact on how they treat Black patients. In this case, it cost this man his life, right? And this is something I've seen on a variety of levels. When my wife was still alive, as I've said, I think several times on my show, that she had sickle cell and she had the most severe form of it. And when we would go to the hospital, and I don't care if it was a hospital we've been to 100 times, which was the case when we lived in Claremont, I would take her to the Pomona Hospital. When we moved to Fresno, I would take her to the hospital. We got her set up in the one in Fresno, but the couple of days before she passed away, she had an incident in class at Fresno State, and her classmates took her to a hospital in Clovis. If you've never been to Fresno, Clovis is pretty much considered the white area of the region, upper scale, so to speak. But in taking her to that hospital, she got really the kind of treatment we always go back and forth about. And that is they treated her like she was drug seeking, right? So basically, when you come in with sickle cell pain, their argument is they can't really assess whether or not you're really in pain, and they don't know if you're just there trying to find drugs. And on many an occasion, I've had doctors and nurses ask me if I was there, if I was putting her up to acting like she was in pain so I could get drugs, while at the same time grilling her about the same kind of thing. So, I mean, that particular day, I actually had to call her childhood doctor. I mean, I had to go through so many doctors to verify her condition that by the time they finally gave her pain medication, the amount was so low it did nothing. They literally had to put her into a coma because they couldn't manage her pain. Now, I'm saying all of this because at the end of the day, the way Black folk are treated in the medical industry is subhuman in many instances, right? It's a lot of issues where accusations that are stereotypically based, tend to shape how people are treated, and I mean medically as well as socially, as well as just coming in and being regarded. Now, that's not been the case across the board in every situation, but when you're looking at a situation like the one I just talked about here with David Bell dying in the parking lot, in a wheelchair, it's ridiculous. And this happens a lot. It's just a question of whether or not it's reported on and we even get to talk about it. But this is one of the kind of things that that goes on a regular basis, right? Mark Tuggle, I see you. I got you. I've just been a little inundated, but I'll get to that. Yeah, but this is ridiculous, and these kind of stories break my heart. And really, one of the main reasons that these stories break my heart is, like most of you, I know how easily this could be me, and that's one of the things that gets to me. So, blessings to this family. I don't know what to say other than I'm sorry for your loss and my condolences. So next up, some of you have seen this one. Like I said, I'm catching up on a few, but I want to put them on the table because really look. The reason I do current events basically is I'm really trying to arm brothers, most particularly with information, because I know what it's like, whether it's, sitting at the table with your family during a holiday, or whether it's a discussion with your woman, or whether it's in a classroom or in a professional platform. You might be on a panel, but when it comes to advocating for Black men, a lot of the time you're going to get argued down, even by other black men, or black women. You're going to be argued down by other black folk, or, and that's not even dealing with the outside world. So I try to give you information, whether it comes in the form of theory, whether it comes in the form of data, whether it comes in the form of current events, that you can use to really push the point about how black males are treated. And that's why I do these. That's why I take the time to do them, because I know that they're important. And this kind of information can make the difference between getting the word out and not. And it's not always about whether or not you're able to beat somebody in a debate or anything like that. It really is not only for your own development, but also for people who are listening to you that you may not know are listening, right? 9 times out of 10, if I've gotten into a debate on social media, I'm almost indifferent to the person I'm debating with, because, usually when people are debating with you, they're so dead set on opposing you, they don't listen. But it's the people along the sides who are reading the exchange back and forth. Those are the ones that reach out to me the most and tell me, wow, I didn't know this, I didn't know that. And that's when you can see the impact of this information. So the reason I go through these current events is to really kind of give you examples of the things we talk about and why they're important. And that's most particularly in Black male studies, but as well as the Black manosphere, right? So here, this is the title of this article you can find on dailymail.co.uk, and you can find it on several others, I'm more than sure, is pastor's pregnant wife, 27, is arrested for sexually assaulting at least 4 boys with her husband, who paid the teens to have sex with the mom of 5 while he watched, right? I'm only going to read a couple of the highlights. Jasminique Strickland, 27, charged with 8 felony counts of child sexual assault and abuse and human trafficking of a minor. This is where it gets interesting to me. Her husband, former Kalamazoo, Michigan pastor Strickland, I'm not even going to try to read his first name, 38, charged with 11 counts of sex assault and trafficking. So this is interesting. Apparently, she's having sex with underage boys. He's watching. They both are rightfully arrested, but somehow he's got 11 counts. She has 8. Appreciate that, Rashid, as well as Marvin. Thank you very much for the support. Right. So, couple who shared 5 children with 6th on the way are accused of sexually assaulting at least 4 teens in exchange for cash between 2015 and 2018. Alleged victims were recruited from high school where Jasminique worked as a secretary and from her husband's church. Damn. Boys told police Strick paid them between $50 and $200 for nude photos and sexual acts with himself and his wife. Oh, there it is. Some of the teens told police the pastor watched as they had sex with Jasminique or had oral sex performed on them by her. Now, again, when I was younger, and I still hear men do it all the time. I still hear people do it. Well, what's the problem, right? These boys, I'm sure they were adult enough. We make too much of a fuss about sexual engagements with the young, and that really is a case they really make for black males more than anything. And that goes back to the age of 5, where statistically, I mean, in terms of the data on the matter, boys as young as 5, black boys, are seen to be older, bigger, and more threatening than they are. Right. So by the time you get to 16, the idea is that you're a man. Right. But here's the thing. When I became a father and I got a chance to watch my son grow up, I got a chance to see people, even kids on the playground, because he was always the 99th percentile for height and weight for his age. So, right now he's 15 and he's 6'6". Right. And that's always been the case. He's always been bigger than the kids around him at his age. And usually he's the youngest one in the room. But I've noticed even the kids would treat him like he was older, right? And it didn't help that he was their size, even though he'd be much younger, right? So those kind of things would happen on a regular basis. And they happened to me when I was younger, right? And the idea was that, he can handle it, right? He's young. But what I've noticed with younger people in particular, especially when they're being sexually exploited by people in their 30s and 40s and upwards, is that they are not prepared emotionally for what tends to go on, right? They are not emotionally and psychologically prepared the majority of the time. If you don't believe me, please go check out Tommy Curry and Ebony Utley's paper, She Touched Me, and read that and look at the cases by adult black men as they talk about how they were sexually abused at younger ages and the ongoing impact that it had on them into adulthood, right? So just because they look a certain way, and just because they're having sex, and you may think that they can handle it, sometimes it takes years to realize that the trauma that they're experiencing was well beyond their years and their capability to deal with. So that being said, especially the parents, please watch your children closely, because you have no idea sometimes what other people may want to do to them and why, right? So keep an eye out for that, because this is no joke, right? Right, Adam. There's no rites of passage for Black boys raised by single mothers. The model of manhood is often distorted in our upbringings. Absolutely. All right. So this piece is about California's own Employment Development Department. Basically, what we had happen very recently in this ABC News report is that California unemployed fraud 4 times worse than first reported $8 billion paid to criminals, as they call it. The amount of unemployment funds stolen from California taxpayers in 2020 may total more than $8 billion, 4 times higher than estimated just 1 month ago. Bank of America said last month $2 billion have been paid out in fraudulent unemployment claims. But Robert Lapsley of the California Business Roundtable says the number is higher, way higher. The state revealed before the pandemic more than 8% of all jobless claims paid between 2016 and 19 went to scammers. Last year, California paid out $106 billion in EDD benefits. If you take that same number, that puts, the total fraud, at least $8.5 billion, said Lapsley. He blasts the way the state handled the pandemic, saying it didn't do enough to prevent fraud earlier on, right? And these are just individual people. So nobody wants to talk about the companies that got away with fraud and got away with millions. There are a few that were caught last year, but I suspect it was quite a few more than that, right? So just keeping you abreast. If you get any more articles like this, definitely hand them over, right? Because I think about the people that I'm seeing living under bridges and out on the streets. Mogul, appreciate that cash app. And yet, for some reason, these kind of companies and individuals can get away with billions, but the people that seem to need it the most, whole different question. Right. All right. Now, to my masculinists, you will definitely find this one interesting. You can find this one on WSOCTV.com. Mississippi woman stabs husband after dreaming he cheated. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and read that one over again. Mississippi woman stabs husband after dreaming he cheated, right? Lindsay Steffens, 33, of Moselle, is accused of stabbing her sleeping husband early Sunday after she had a dream that her husband had been cheating. Steffens was charged with domestic aggravated assault. According to Jones County online booking records, her bail, get this, her bail was set at $10,000. According to investigators, Stevens said she had a dream that her husband was messing around. At that point, she said she went into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and attacked him, stabbing him multiple times in the back. The man suffered 4 to 7 stab wounds. He underwent surgery Monday and is expected to recover. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're going to see a number of these cases. Because one of the things I've been talking about, what's up, AB, is how men and women are not given the same kind of sentences. And this has been studied. Men get about 63% longer sentences for the same crime as women. And you're going to see in the next few stories how extreme women can be, but they are rarely held accountable to the scale that men are. And yet the acts tend to be extremely egregious and it doesn't matter. And part of the reason for this is we tend to still have a very Victorian notion of femininity, right? Where we have this, it really is, somewhat childish, but it's this sugar and spice and everything nice kind of idea about women, womanhood, and the way we justify and rationalize female behavior, and most particularly female evil, is done in a manner where they're not really treated like human beings, more like special snowflakes that are not really responsible for their own behavior, and it's ridiculous. And I've been calling it out for a while, and you guys know that. And the reason I do so is because we take it so lightly. because we take it for granted, because these kind of things tend to go under the radar, and you're lucky to even see it in the news, let alone actually see the person punished to the full extent that men tend to get. Now there are a couple of cases, obviously, where that is the case, but not as many as we're familiar with for men. Case in point, here we go. Right. So this was actually updated in 2019, but it just came across my desk, so I thought it important to look at. A woman who murdered child's father breaks down in court apologizing to his mother. Right. This is in Clayton County, Georgia. Right. Woman found guilty of murdering her child's father has been sentenced to 125 years in prison. Let's see. Let me skip that part. They said, okay, so Channel 2 was in the courtroom where Sierra Harp learned her fate. A jury found Harp guilty of murdering Raheem Grant. She recorded herself on Grant's cell phone, shooting him multiple times over several minutes in front of their daughter. During the sentencing, Harp looked right at Grant's mother in the courtroom and asked everyone for forgiveness. She said, "I was not in my right state of mind. Had I not been drunk, it would have never happened." She says to Miss Grant Bryson, "I'm truly sorry." Harp called it an accident when she recorded herself shooting Grant multiple times in his apartment in 2017. She told police Grant had beaten her that night and she shot him in self-defense. Then police uncovered cell phone video Grant shot of himself on camera saying she stabbed him. Harp turned the video on and off as she shot him over 13 minutes as their daughter watched. On the video, Grant could be heard warning Harp that she's going to spend a long time in prison after she kept shooting him. She said, "I don't care if I go to jail for the rest of my life." And apparently Grant's warning came true. Yeah. 13 times. I'm sorry, let me see, 13 minutes overall, where she shot him multiple times. This is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, Mike, they didn't say why, other than she said that if she was drunk, she wouldn't have done it. That's the excuse she gave. So I'm trying to imagine a husband in court videotapes, or, I'm dating myself, videotapes, but records shooting his wife over a 13-minute span in front of their daughter on camera and coming to court and saying, "Sorry, I was drunk. It wouldn't have happened otherwise." I don't know. I rarely see those kind of cases work that way, but she put that excuse forth like that was somehow justifiable, you know. But like I said, this one was 2019, so it's a little bit older. But again, when I talk about abuse, when I talk about intimate partner homicide in the Black community, as far as abuse is concerned, the rates are bidirectional, meaning that they're roughly even in terms of female aggressors and male aggressors. Now, female aggressors often strike first. They tend to use weapons more often. Male aggressors tend to use their own hands, right? But in the Black community, again, it's fairly equal in terms of the amount of abuse initiated in both directions. And yet Black men have the stereotype of being abusive. And of course, the narrative is that women are inherently victims because, right? So what does she say? She goes in and she says she was abused because that's an acceptable excuse, right? Most people believe it. If a man says I've been abused, people tend to look at you sideways. If a woman says it, we tend to believe her, hashtag believe her. And that's the end of the conversation, as if there's no such abuse of power that goes on when people use that they are more readily believed in a predator-like fashion. We act like this doesn't happen, and it's absolutely ridiculous. Now, on the next case, we're dealing with a whole different kind of situation, and this is one that we're seeing really I would argue, as a product of the stress that tends to be going on right now during the pandemic, the economy, the lack of employment, and the difficulty that many are dealing with. Right. So this is a case here in Tennessee, and it says woman leaps to her death off a Tennessee overpass, clutching her toddler. Now I've told you guys the last few shows we're going to see a lot of this, and we've been seeing it all last year. In terms of what what these kind of tensions and fears bring about, right? So, police in Tennessee are trying to determine what could have prompted a young mother to leap to her death over an overpass while clutching her toddler, who was also killed. Tanisha Lachey Barker, 26, and a child died just after midnight Monday morning on I 40 near exit 93. Madison County Sheriff's Office deputies first responded to a call about a crash at a gas station in which a woman had apparently tried to hit a gas pump. Then 911 calls came in from people reporting they'd seen a woman get out of the car holding a small child, walk to the I 40 overpass, and disappear. Soon after that, another call came in, this one from a truck driver who said a large object had fallen from the bridge and hit his vehicle as he traveled west on I 40. Police found the two bodies. A relative identified the boy as 21-month-old Jonathan Jones. Barker was from Memphis, and that's all that was said about her. You can find that in NY Daily News. Woman leaps to her death off of a Tennessee overpass, clutching her toddler. Right. This is the kind of thing that as I said, is going on more and more. People giving up their kids, the abuse rates going through the roof. But how much of it we hear in any concentrated, organized fashion is a whole nother question. But it is nonetheless what we are dealing with right now. So, yeah, this is sad, but these kind of things have been happening lately quite a bit in one way or another, right? All right. You thought your patience was tried with the last few cases. This one you can find on nydailynews.com as well. Title of this one is Mom Boyfriend. Mom and should read Mom and Boyfriend accused of violently abusing 8-year-old boy found dead in a Texas hotel. Texas woman and her boyfriend were charged with capital murder Tuesday in the senseless killing of her 8-year-old son, who was found badly injured and unconscious in a Dallas area hotel over the weekend. Police accused the couple of violently abusing the boy for at least 10 days before he was killed Friday in a hotel near Dallas Fort Worth International Airport in Irving. Officers were dispatched to the scene that evening for a report of an unconscious person inside a hotel room. The Irving Police Department said in a news release, when cops arrived, they found Delmore Best Curtis lying on bed unresponsive and with numerous injuries to his body. They tried to perform CPR, but he was pronounced dead, arriving at a hospital moments later. Police immediately launched a murder investigation and learned that the child's mother, 30-year-old Leslie Curtis, had moved into the hotel in November with her son and her boyfriend, 29-year-old Cody McCrory. The couple had been dating for less than a year. Authorities believe the boy was not attending school since the family moved to the hotel. Yeah. Again, these are the kind of things we're seeing right now that are impacting people. And it's ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. So this 8-year-old boy was tortured and beaten to death by mother and her boyfriend. This is what we're talking about. But the cases get crazier and crazier, people. It's the climate of the time we're living in and the way that the environment is stoking these issues, right? So, for example, case in point, West Virginia mom fatally shot 5 kids, burned down house, then died by suicide. She says her demons won her over, right? West Virginia mother murdered 5 children, torched her house with their bodies inside, and then fatally shot herself in December. Oriana Myers, 25, was the mother of 3 of the kids and stepmother to the other 2, according to police. She shot all 5 in the head with a shotgun. Myers and her husband, Brian Bumgarner, lived in the tiny town of Williamsburg, West Virginia, about 30 miles from the Virginia state line. Bumgarner was staying with relatives on the fatal day, December 8th, because their car had broken down and he needed transportation to work. Investigators found several texts from Myers to her husband prior to December 8th. You'll have nothing to come back to but a corpse. No one cares. Why should I? She said. Money will come and go. Once I go, there's no replacing me. I beg and cry for help, but never get it. It's my mental health that needs tending to. Help me. I do not care anymore. Myers shot each of the children inside the house, then walked outside, turned the gun on herself. The children were 7, 6, 4, 3, and 1 year old. Said that she left 3 separate notes beside her body, including a chilling confession. She says, I shot all the boys in the head. I had set house on fire. I shot myself in the head. She says, I'm sorry. Mental health is serious. I hope one day someone will help others like me. Mental health is not to joke about or to be taken lightly. When someone begs, pleads, cries out for help, please help them. You just might save a life or more lives. In another note, she said, this is no one's fault but my own. My demons went over me and there's no going back. Sorry, I wasn't strong enough. Cops say Myers had no documented history of mental health problems and that Child Protective Services was never in contact with Bumgarner or Myers. This is in NY Daily News as well. Right. Now, I've said this on several occasions, especially in regard to Black males. Get help if you feel you need it, if something is going on, if you don't know how to articulate what's happening, if things feel strange, definitely go get help. If it's a suicide matter, call the hotlines. If it's a matter of needing therapy, needing counseling, call, try and get help, but definitely don't keep it to yourself, which Black men are wont to do, and don't retreat into isolation. And that's harder than not during COVID. There's no question. But at the end of the day, reach out for help if you need it. And of course, I employ everybody that needs to please do so. I would say that even I've witnessed people do things they couldn't imagine doing under other circumstances when they're in pain. But cases like this are, of course, way beyond the pale, right? So please make sure you get help, right? And I got a couple for y'all like this. It's been a last couple weeks have been crazy. It's been a lot been going on that we need to look at. And again, we're looking especially at a variety of overlapping issues, right? Whether we're talking about female abusers or aggressors, whether we're talking about male victims, or whether we're talking about the ways that males and females are regarded by the law enforcement industry and how the law is implemented. Now, this case here, it's going to mess with you. It's going to mess with you. Brazilian mom beat daughter to death, gouged out her eyeballs and tongue, then tried to eat them during psychotic episode. Brazilian police are investigating the barbaric murder of 5-year-old child whose mother allegedly beat her to death, removed her eyeballs and part of her tongue, and then tried to eat the child's organs in an apparent psychological episode this week, according to local authorities. The mentally disturbed suspect was arrested Sunday after cops arrived at the scene and found her praying next to the victim's dead body. Excuse me. Police in the northeastern state of Alagoas, I know I've mispronounced that, I apologize, said in a news release the woman had reportedly used a pair of scissors to cut her child's organs inside the family's bathroom before trying to swallow them. She later told authorities that the child was possessed by a demon, adding that it was the demon who died and not her daughter, according to the local news outlet. Police said the investigation is in the early stages, but they believe the woman was having a severe psychological episode or psychotic episode when she attacked her own child. Right? Local media identified the suspect as 30-year-old Josemar Gomez da Silva, and the victim as Brenda Caroline da Silva. Police told reporters that it's the child's grandfather who called for help after the suspect locked herself in the bathroom with the girl. When cops arrived, the victim was already dead, with parts of her organs next to her. Authorities also found blood running from a drain behind the house while surveying the gruesome scene. So in this case, I'm asking you, if you witness someone else acting strangely, especially in any kind of hostile way, and they are in charge of children, please be mindful of the child's safety. That's all I can really say. Because this is ridiculous, but these are the kind of things that are happening, right? These are the kind of things that are happening all around the world. But we often overlook them, and we often don't really expect them from women, by and large. I mean, if I were to introduce this case in my class and not read the names of the people involved, I think most would assume that this was a man. But at the end of the day, we have got to become more savvy about how people in pain, regardless of gender, um, or people who need help, can act out in these kind of ways, and it be overlooked, and it's necessary that we need to. So, keep your mind up on what's going on around you, right? Illinois woman faces natural life sentence, the state's harshest punishment after alleged murder of 7-year-old daughter. See? Now, notice the frequency in these cases. Now, I've been doing this, I've been reporting on them since I started my show in 2019 in the summer. And almost every show you've seen me report on these cases, but there have been more and more, and they've been escalating in number, I would argue. But it's always a question of whether or not, they make it to the news. But, we already know the rates of abuse, especially for children, tend to be higher with the mothers because they are the primary caregivers. Nevertheless, with what's going on right now, these are the kind of cases that are really hitting people. Galesburg, Illinois. Woman is facing the state's most severe legal punishment, a natural life sentence, and the stabbing death of her 7-year-old daughter. Judge Graham read the charges to Hazel Ivy, 29 years old, at her first court appearance via video conference Monday, stating the woman stabbed the child with a knife, causing her death. Ivy is facing 2 counts of first-degree murder. Police responded to a possible homicide on Sunday at a public housing project, and Ivy directed officers to the second floor of an apartment. The victim was found stabbed 10 times in the face and body. Knox County State's Attorney Jeremy Carlin said he would seek a natural life sentence against Ivy because of statutory aggravating factors alleged in this homicide. He said in court that the evidence showed the child's death came from exceptional, brutal, or heinous behavior indicative of wanton cruelty. He also said the multiple wounds on the victim's face were evidence of torture. The child was pronounced dead at the scene, and Ivy was taken into custody, authorities said. Ivy's older child was taken into shelter care with the Illinois Department of Child Family Services. Ivy reportedly moved to Galesburg from Chicago with her children in recent years. She has a CDL license and formerly worked as a truck driver. The 7-year-old was not registered in Galesburg District's 205 schools. So yet again, another case of a child that wasn't registered in any of the local schools. And yet, this is what we're seeing. Right. Now, again, I organize these cases very organically. They're literally as they come. I do not go out my way to find them. I just, occasionally people will send me cases, but for the most part, I just go to some fairly traditional sites, or I'll just be in Facebook, and these cases will just float up. And it's always amazing to me when I see these kind of cases. What I tend to see is people going out of their way to humanize, the person who is the aggressor, right? They'll talk about what she must have been going through. They'll talk about the stress, the strain, the difficulties of motherhood, particularly single motherhood. And I'm not denying that any of those things are relevant. Not at all. One of the things I notice, however, when the aggressor tends to be a man, there's no attempt at humanizing him. He's a monster. Now, I'm not talking about whether you've stated in the last few moments if some of the women I've reported on were monsters, but I'm saying overall, in the aggregate, what I notice is that when we talk about male aggressors, there's a one dimensionality to how we frame who they are and why they did what they did. When it's a female aggressor, we actually look for ways to humanize even the most inhumane acts. Now, I don't show these because I believe that women are more apt to murder and we just don't pay attention to it. I'm saying, well, I'm saying that when they do, we treat them very differently. But The other issue is how the environment plays a role in this, especially when you're talking about a predominantly impoverished environment, right? When you're looking at the Black community, we're especially looking at a community that is on the lower end of the spectrum as far as income and wealth, most particularly in regard to their relationship to other racial groups. And I don't find it surprising at all that you'll see these kinds of cases, particularly during a pandemic, when it's said that half of Black America lost its employment last March. This doesn't surprise me. It saddens me, but it doesn't surprise me. So just to kind of put some context to it, right? That's why we look at these. All right. And I'm telling you, this one here, Roselle woman poured boiling water on sleeping boyfriend. This is in Roselle, Illinois. 22-year-old woman allegedly poured boiling water on her boyfriend while he slept at their Roselle apartment, causing burns that required skin graft surgery. After Alexis Sykes dumped the boiling water on him early January 2nd, she went onto Snapchat and described watching his skin fall off his arms. Sykes allegedly posted a video with the caption, "I kind of feel bad now because he got second and third degree burns from face to waist, and they rushing him to burn center, but oh well," shrugging shoulder emoji, B word, emoji blowing kiss. And the end still cried and begged me to drive him to a hospital. Prosecutors didn't give a motive behind the scalding. Her boyfriend eventually found the keys that she had hid and drove himself to a hospital. He was transferred to the Loyola University Medical Center burn unit, where he was hospitalized for about 2 weeks and underwent skin graft surgery to treat his burns. Sykes was held Monday on $500,000 bail on 2 counts of aggregated battery by caustic substance and 2 counts of aggregated domestic battery. That's what we're looking at. Yeah. This is what we're talking about. So, in case you didn't know, this is a case of intimate partner violence. And I have men and women, I've had scholars tell me that men are incapable of being victims of intimate partner violence or homicide for that matter. And I've also had men tell me that it can't happen. There's frequently, when I report on these kind of things on social media, I frequently will have brothers tell me, "Oh, well, I'm 250 whatever pounds. I ain't gonna, nobody, no woman can hurt." These kind of Superman out. Look, stop it. Stop it. Again, one of the reasons I report on male victimization is the degree to which we don't believe it happens, but it happens. Because I don't care how many weights you lift. I don't care how many guns you shoot. I don't care how many years of martial arts training you've had. None of that protects you from having boiling water poured on you when you're asleep, or having your food poisoned. Right? Shout out Dr. Thunder. Appreciate the support. Right? None of that helps you navigate any of that. And we're not even talking about emotional or psychological abuse. We're not even there, because a lot of that is hard to document. Many of us have seen it with other couples, and we've experienced it in our own relationships, but that's harder to kind of get on the record. It's harder to kind of prove. But when you have cases like this, right, there's no amount of macho that's going to get you through this. It is what it is. You can be abused. Abuse, the images of abuse we have go back to movies and television shows from the 70s. And we have this kind of narrow view that it's always some, woman that's getting slapped around by some, hyper aggressive guy. And that's our primary narrative for what abuse looks like. So you have people tell you men can't be abused, which makes no sense whatsoever. Again, the rates of abuse are bidirectional, particularly in the Black community. They are equal. This is not a one-way dynamic. But we get so comfortable dismissing Black men in many of these instances that I find it troubling that people have a hard time even accepting that these things can happen, but they do often. And we need to treat them as seriously as we do when men are the aggressors. Because this man right here with second and third degree burns, who drove himself to the hospital, but actually had to look for the keys she hid first. You gonna tell me that there wasn't any psychological or emotional abuse that happened before that? But often what I'll hear is that, oh, well, he must have done something. See, this is the excuse. Whenever I hear men being abused or killed for that matter, the first assumption I hear people come to the table with is, what did he do? Which I find interesting. Because I've rarely, if ever, seen a case where a man abused a woman and publicly, especially with women, seen them ask the question, I wonder what she did first. I've never seen it. I've seen them ask if men have done it, but I've never seen anybody actually just say, I wonder what she did. Like that was a bit that comedian Bill Burr did once where he talked about that. He said, look, I accept that there are abusers in this world. I accept that there are men that are pieces of slime and this and that. But he said, can we admit that ass whoopings don't just fall out the sky for most people who are experiencing abuse? Right? That was the narrative. That's what he introduced in his comedy bit. Right. And of course, he got all kinds of backlash for it. But it's an interesting question because when a woman is abused, we humanize her, we accept that she's abused, and we wonder what else he did prior to that. When a man is abused, we don't ask any questions. We don't wonder what happened prior to that. We don't ask what she may have done prior to that. And if he beats her, we don't ask what she's done. It's a one-way street. It's a one-way street. If she physically assaults him, he must have done something. There's a recorded video I show in my class where we look at abuse, and there are two actors, and you can find all of these in YouTube. There's so many of these cases, right? Where you have a male and female actor, and they'll be playing out a scene where they're, in an intimate relationship, and he'll abuse her in public, and they'll watch the responses. And then, of course, every now and again, they'll reverse it where she's abusing him. And people will stand around and laugh if they stand around at all when he's being abused. They walk by. I've even seen cases where they'll slap the guy's hat off his head while the girl is abusing him as they're walking by. And these are just random people that don't even know him, right? But in those same instances, if you see the actor start to abuse her, right, men will come from everywhere. Especially men. Now, women will crowd around and they may say something. Men will come put hands on a perfect stranger to protect the woman. This is what I mean when I say we have no framework for dealing with female acts of evil. We do not know how to hold women accountable. We don't know how. Right? So when you see cases like this, I don't take them lightly because I know it was more than likely a lot of abuse that went on before. And there are different kinds of abuse. Some of you may find this one interesting, right? You can find this article in dailymail.co.uk, right? Married teacher 35 found guilty of having outdoor sex with her 15-year-old pupil after adding him on Snapchat and sending him flirty messages as well as naked pics, as husband holds her hand and brands the verdict a joke. Candace Barber pursued the pupil after spying him at a school sports day. She entered her Snapchat details into her phone and sent topless photos, had sex in the field after school behind the back of delivery worker husband. Second time Barber has been on trial after first was unable to reach verdict. So this married teacher faces up to 5 years in jail after being found guilty of having sex with a 50. See, notice how they do this. And I've said this repeatedly, and these cases keep proving me right. They always label these having sex. When it's a male aggressor, they don't play around with the verbiage. They call it rape. They don't even bother with statutory. If it's, statutory, it's rape. But when you have a female aggressor, she had outdoor sex. 35 years old with a 15-year-old, right? I have had intelligent women that I'd gone to school with, had a great deal of respect for, actually try and argue me down that this is not as bad as it sounds. 15 is older than it looks like. And we need to change the laws on the age because, these boys are essentially young men. I've heard these arguments time and time again, but only as it pertains to female aggressors. Nothing as it pertains to male aggressors as far as that. So again, if you flip the narrative here, 35-year-old married male teacher having sex with his 15-year-old female pupil, right, on school grounds. You still hear people calling for a shift in the law as far as acceptable ages to do this with? I don't. Right? If he's sending her penis pictures, that's not dismissed as cute, things of that nature. Apparently, her husband went to court with her and held her hand and called the whole situation a joke, right? But apparently, it says that she was found to have taken the underage boy to a field, kissed him on the neck next to a bale of hay, and whispered, "What do you want to do now?" before having full intercourse with him. Mother of three's lawyer had claimed she was too short. And get this. This is the lawyer. The lawyer claimed that she was too short at 5 feet tall to have sex with the boy standing up, alongside the teacher lying that her packed calendar meant she was too busy to have slept with him. So understand what's going on here. She's in court and she's basically saying that the evidence that she didn't have sex with the boy was that she's too short to have had sex standing up with him, and that her calendar was too busy. Yeah, Iman, too short. This is what passes for an argument against rape. And they done found naked pictures that you done sent to this boy on his phone. Right? She said she was going through a bad patch with her husband. So I guess she eventually flipped on herself and admitted to doing it. And then it became she went to a bad patch with her husband, that she was pregnant but lost the child. They wanted another, but it wasn't happening. Things were strained between her and her husband. The boy paid her attention, and she let her guard down and started to talk to him. This is what she says. So understand what. So first she says that it didn't happen. Then she says the reason she knows it didn't happen and can prove it is because she's too short and she's too busy. And then she says, okay, well, it happened, but I was going through a bad patch with my husband because we couldn't have a child. And this is evidence. But again, when the title of the article is that she has outdoor sex with a 15-year-old pupil, that already tells you the way we regard these cases makes no sense. No sense. We have a culture where we are socializing men and women to regard women as inherently non-threatening and incapable of causing significant harm. Ergo, we sentence them differently, we regard them differently, and even when they commit acts that we know are illegal, we change the language to kind of downplay it. Now, obviously, she's up against the clock in terms of how much time she'll get, but the problem at the end of the day is when the culture doesn't change to address that women are actually human beings, what that means is it has an impact on a larger scale. What do I mean? Well, here's the problem. You got a jury case, right? You got a jury that comes in out of the populace, right, to judge a situation, to make sense of the evidence provided, and to decide if there's any punishment to be levied. If in the society you live in, right, female evil doesn't exist, female accountability, not really. These things are just kind of marginally addressed, and you have a one-way, appreciate that, Brandon, appreciate the Cash App, and you have a one-way narrative, right, on holding men accountable, but being extremely liberal with women, that's going to permeate throughout society. So you can pull together a jury, but more often than not, they're going to be far more lenient because you haven't changed the culture. And that's one of the reasons I report on these things the way I do, because we need to change the culture. Women are human. I'm not doing this to hyper penalize women for things they haven't done. I'm pointing out things that they have. And yet most of the cases I report on, most people that listen to my show have never heard of. They're barely in the news. Barely. But it needs to be dealt with, right? It needs to be addressed. So let's go ahead. Let's look at what we got next. Harlem mom fatally shot after confronting man who groped her on the street, right? Now, before you think that that's all there is to this, I just want to say this is how titles, because we're very title driven. I mean, we have so much information coming to us, especially in social media, that we tend to be very title driven, right? The title gets our attention, and sometimes, many times actually, many of us, and I've done it too, will read the title and not read the article and just kind of have that in our mental, archive. And it may come up in a conversation, right? But we don't often read the articles. We go with the title, which is why when the title says a 30-year-old woman had sex with a 12-year-old boy, even rape versus had sex has a subliminal impact on how seriously we regard these situations. But with this one, it's a little interesting. So the title says Harlem mom fatally shot after confronting man who groped her on the street. Now, just listening to that, I'm incensed. When I think about, the women I care for, women in my family, if they're confronting someone that's groping them and they get shot, I am outraged, and rightfully so. And we should be outraged for her. I'm not taking that away from the dynamic at all. But listen to what's left out of the title. A Harlem mom was fatally shot after she and her fiance confronted a man who had just groped her on the street. Police said Monday as they passed their search for the as they pressed their search for the gunman. Shadina Smith left her apartment on West 150th Street near Frederick Douglass Boulevard about 12:30 p.m. on January 16th. Then rushed back to tell her boyfriend that a man had grabbed her. 26-year-old fiance and Smith, 29, went outside and confronted the groper, sparking an argument that led to gunfire. The couple was caught in a hail of bullets inside the first floor hallway of their apartment building. The fiance was hit in the chest and left arm, and Smith was struck 3 times in the chest. Both were taken to Harlem Hospital, where Smith died. Her fiance has since been released from the hospital. So there's a whole nother dynamic going on here, again, that we don't really have a vocabulary for. And that is proxy violence. Now, basically what I'm saying here is that in no way does this woman deserve to die. No way. Neither does her fiance. Michael, appreciate the support on the Cash App. Neither does her fiance deserve to get shot. And it was an arbitrary thing in the sense that it could have been reversed. He could have been the one shot 3 times in the chest and her in the arm. It doesn't sound like the person who shot them, it sounded like it was just shots fired, and whoever caught it, right? In this instance, she caught it. To be honest with you, if she didn't catch it and he died, I don't even know if this would have been an article, because just based on the title, he wasn't even involved. And it takes me back to the Breonna Taylor case in the sense that I heard all of these arguments about what Black men don't do. Black men don't protect. Black men don't care. Black men don't whatever. Even though even in the Breonna Taylor case, her boyfriend actually was there and tried to protect her. But then I heard all kinds of issues with that. And people tried to pick it apart and argue that he really didn't care, whatever. So you look at this case. It's not even a matter of what people are saying about it. The way it's reported by the NY Daily News, it's like he wasn't even there. But let's look at the mechanics of what happened. She was groped. She went to her fiance for a certain type of protection. What was that protection? She wanted him to go outside with her and confront the guy. Now, we've all grown up hearing about these kind of things. And if you're a man, you've probably been in a situation where you felt the pressure of your woman looking at you to be able to vanquish any kind of villain in the situation. Doesn't matter if he's 5'2" or 6'9". Your job as a man is to protect her. Right? Okay, so it looks like I might be having some trouble broadcasting to Facebook. So if you're listening to this on Facebook, you're having any trouble, you can switch on over to either YouTube or Instagram or innerlightradio.com and keep up with the show. But anyway, so what I'm saying to you here is when I talk about proxy violence, basically what that is when you have a woman And I'm talking about proxy violence in a very particular a masculinist frame, a black masculinist frame, meaning that proxy violence in this instance is when a woman can go get another man or other men, right, to implement violence on other men, right? And it can happen in a million different ways. I mean, there's no one way that proxy violence tends to work, but that's principally what happened here, right? She went, got her boyfriend, came back, and wanted her boyfriend to handle the situation. Now, she was obviously involved, but if she wasn't bringing her boyfriend in to handle the situation and attack the guy that groped her, she would have done it herself. She went to go get him, right? There's many a man that has died in a situation like this. And the interesting thing about it is when it's reported and recorded into the record, it's just two men in an altercation. This is one of the reasons why it's still not part of our discourse to talk about the ways in which women are involved in initiating proxy violence, right? And it doesn't even have to be just between one man and another. It can be a police officer. In other words, it can be her getting a boyfriend to confront the authorities on her behalf, even if it costs him his life, right? But these kind of cases are just assumed to be acceptable in a particular sense. And in this one, we're not going to pay attention to him at all because he only got shot a couple times and he didn't die. So his name doesn't even, not even his name, his title, his role in her life doesn't even make the title because he's alive and therefore it's not important. But it just as easily could have been him. And I've reported on cases where it was him dying of proxy violence. And for what? Right? Situation was over. The groping was unacceptable, but over. She was no longer threatened. She was in the house and brought him out to go attack this dude, this stranger. Right. So, yeah. And that's why we have to change the vocabulary and talk about things like proxy violence to make sense of what exactly is expected of men. It's not just about, I mean, when you talk about providing and protection, these kind of things, these are very traditional roles that men are still expected to act out. Very old ideas about protecting and providing, which I have no problem with. The problem I have with it is women tend to enjoy those old roles for men, but not for themselves. So, in other words, you still have to protect, provide, provision, minister, all of those things to the family, but she pretty much gets to do whatever she wants. She can stay at home and not work. She can work part-time. She can work full-time. She can have kids, not have kids. She can have an abortion. She can do whatever she wants. And you, at best, can only make suggestions. But really, if you're considerate, you can only make those suggestions if she asks you. But what's expected of men? Same as in the 50s. We like to say it's changed, but it's really only changed for women. Social expectations of men haven't changed. So when she came to her fiance for protection, he knew it was part of his job. She knew it was part of his job. Perfectly acceptable arrangement. And as much as I'm not talking about their particular relationship, I am saying in general, the expectations on women playing out traditional roles have completely been undermined. And when one side of it has been undermined, both sides are undermined. And that's one of the reasons we're seeing the roles men are playing and the statements men are making now starting to change. Because in the last 50 years, only one gender has changed their dynamic in relation to the other, but the expectations on men haven't. Now, this case right here, interesting. My father lost his own self-control. Washington State man charged 2 years after fatally shooting daughter's black boyfriend. All right. Washington State man has been criminally charged 2 years after he fatally shot his daughter's black friend after she sneaked him into her bedroom. The Snohomish County Prosecuting Attorney's Office announced Monday that Charles Heller, 49-year-old Everett man, has been charged with second-degree murder 2 years after he fatally shot 21-year-old Dustin Hunt, the young black man and his 20-year-old daughter Lauren was dating. I guess the young black man she was dating. The shooting happened after Heller went into his daughter's room after he and his wife heard her talking and laughing with someone. When Heller went to his daughter's bedroom door, he was armed. Earlier in the day, February 25th, 2019, Lauren had sneaked Hunt into her room in her parents' Silver Lake home without the two interacting with her parents. At around 10 p.m., Heller sent a text message to his daughter saying her guests needed to leave within the next half hour. Lauren Heller left the home briefly so her dad would think they had left, while Hunt, a hip hop artist who performed under the name Nabi Cosmo, hid under the bed. She was still outside when she saw her bedroom light turning on and off and heard her father yelling. By the time she got into the house, Heller was yelling and pointing his gun at Hunt, who was trying to get dressed. Heller's finger was on the trigger the entire time he was pointing the weapon. Prosecutors wrote in the charges. The point was important to Lauren and played a large role in her fear because her father, formerly in the military, has training in handling firearms and taught her that you do not put your finger on the trigger unless you are prepared to shoot. Absolutely. Hunt said he was going to leave, but when Lauren put herself between him and the gun, he pushed the weapon away from her, knocking Heller to the ground. Heller stood up, aimed for Hunt's shoulder, and fired. He then walked into the kitchen, set the gun down, and told his wife to call the ambulance. County sheriff's deputies received 2 calls from the residents that night, one from Lauren herself and the other from Heller's wife. Hunt was declared dead when medics arrived. Heller later told investigators he thought Hunt was armed, although he was not. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Be careful, fellas. That's all I can say. Be careful. This is one of the dynamics about interracial relationships we don't talk about. And we will be talking about them in the other direction soon enough tonight. But in terms of Black men with white women and dealing with their fathers, this is something that, any Black man that deals with white women is aware of or damn well should be. This is a possibility. It is what it is. And it can take all kinds of different forms. So all I can say is, if that's the route you're going to go, please be careful, and it doesn't even have to get this extreme, but you when you sense it, be aware of it, be aware of it, because this kind of mess is real. Hell, I remember in 7th grade, it was after school and I was hanging out on the campus and this white girl I was going to school with was sitting next to me. And we were talking about class, the class we had earlier in the day, right? 7th grade. She was cute. I was cute. Didn't go anywhere. Didn't try nothing. 7th grade. At that time, if you held hands every now and again, they called it you were going around with somebody. That lasted about a week. 2 weeks was the equivalent of being married for 30 years as far as 7th graders were concerned at that time. But I was just sitting next to her. And her mom drove up to pick her up and had this look on her face, seeing her sit next to me. That's all we were doing. She was just sitting there. We were talking about class. Do you know I never saw that girl again? Never. Her mom took her home. And from what I heard, they flied that girl out to her family elsewhere out of state. Never saw her again. And all I did was sit next to her. Careful. It is what it is. All right. This one was interesting. This is a case, there's an article I put up entitled Fact Check 83% of Black men earning $100,000 annual income marry Black women. Yale University study found that 42% of Black women are married. The off-cited figure of 42% of Black women never marrying includes all Black women 18 and older. It was argued by one Dr. Ivory Toldson that raising the age in an analysis eliminates age groups we don't really expect to be married and gives a more accurate estimate of true marital rates. Now, this is a problem because in other communities, they still get married young. And realistically, even in our community, that used to happen. My mother's generation, my grandmother's generation, it was far more the norm for women to get married young. It's really post 1980 that we saw this serious push for women to choose career over marriage. And so basically what a number of these researchers are trying to do is make the argument that if you adjust for age, more Black women get married. And at the same time, they're arguing that the notion of the high value man over six figures, that overwhelmingly the majority, over 75%, I believe it is, marry Black women, which it is what it is. I mean, I don't have any debate with that. But the reason I bring this up is that uh, I find the age adjustment thing a little suspect, but more than that, I notice how they ignored the divorce rates, right? And basically, the purpose of this article is to try and debunk the stereotype that Black women are not marrying, not marriageable. But again, in order to accomplish that, they kind of have to sidestep some things. So the 50% divorce rate, 51% divorce rate, and the degree to which nearly 80% of those divorces are initiated by women, that kind of just that's not important because it doesn't support the image we're trying to get to at the end of the day. And so that's one of the things I kind of found interesting about this piece. It plays a very political role in trying to establish, particular identity in regard to Black women and marriage, but at the same time, it wants to belie, the realities of how divorce plays a role in this, the role family court plays, child support judgments, even though alimony's gone down, we know feminists in the early 80s, in the late 70s, really pushed to expand child support to account for alimony, because they initially stood against alimony, and because these are white feminists in particular, second wave feminists, third wave, and they argued that women should be able to stand on their own and work and not need a man. So they were really pushing to eliminate or at least greatly diminish alimony. But then they found that women were struggling, so they instead then began to push to expand the amounts that child support judgments would levy against men, and they were successful. Right. So again, the impact of that on marriage, nobody seems to want to talk about in articles like this. So it's interesting to kind of see, if nothing else. Right. But the other thing I think is important in this kind of thing is it pushes yet again, this trope. And you know what? I'm not even going to make the article responsible for this. This is something I hear about and have heard about for years. This idea that finding men of worth is difficult because there are too few. Right. That's one of the ongoing complaints that I've heard, that there are not enough Black men to offer parity, is what they call parity, for successful Black women. Right. And part of the reason you'll hear these kind of things is if you see women congregating in cities like in California or in Georgia, you go to, Atlanta, LA, San Francisco, New York. If you're in these large urban areas, you'll tend to find congregations of people that earn more. And the idea is that somehow Black men don't. But, I find that if we actually go to, you can even go to blackdemographics.com and you can look this up, earnings and employment. And on the right, you have Black women. And on the left, you have Black men, right? And you can look at the whole thing. All right. 356 people watching on Facebook. I'm sorry, on YouTube. And I think still on Facebook, on Twitch, on Instagram, and listening on innerlightradio.com. Please support the show. If you would, I would greatly appreciate that. If you want this kind of programming at least every week, please do so. Right. But anyway, this is what we see. And one of the things I think is incredibly important is if you actually look at, man, I should have hooked up my laptop for this. I completely forgot. Anyway, so if you look right here, you can see my cursor, and you look at the $75,000 per year or more, right? In regard to Black women, you see 9%, right? 9%. Median earnings in 2018, 36,695, right? That's what you see. Let's head on over and look at Black men, right? Median earnings 2018, 41,000. Okay, interesting. Interesting. Almost, almost $5,000 difference. But let's go down. We look at 75,000 or more, 13%. What I find interesting about this is ever since I was a kid in the 1980s, I would hear these arguments that there were too few Black men of means. And as I came through the 90s and the 2000s, I heard more and more and more that the women were doing their thing and Black men were just trifling. They couldn't keep up. They just couldn't offer parity. They had nothing to offer, if anything. And if at most black women had to be charitable to accept black men who are making less. And there's nothing wrong with that. I actually think that needs to be the case. I think you need to deal with the person standing in front of you, especially if you have unrealistic expectations in the first place. Shout out to Kevin Samuels. But what I often find interesting is how much we completely jump over the numbers when it comes to this whole question of whether or not black men are achieving. And what we find is there's a greater percentage of them that are actually doing $75,000 or more. And yet I never hear that brought up. I just find that interesting. I never hear it brought up. I hear the major assumption being made that black men are inherently incapable. And yet there's a greater percentage of them earning more. Now, we know when we account for incarceration, black men as a whole make less. Don't argue that. But there's a greater percentage of them making more. I find that interesting. And I also find it interesting that nobody talks about it. So this whole question of black men not producing, being incapable, so on and so forth, I find it suspect. Right? I find it suspect. And we know across white collar and blue collar occupations, you can find brothers making over six figures. Now, if that's your only lens for looking at black men, I hope you are prepared to offer what they actually want if you're going to compete for them. But that said, if there are more, if there is a greater percentage of them earning that, maybe the problem is not black men. But anyway, right, Mike. That's why I mentioned blue collar, because it's not limited to that. Blue collar brothers can make that too. All right. All right. Some of you may have seen this particular case, right? Beyonce's 34-year-old rapper cousin fatally shot in his apartment. Martell Derowan, I probably mispronounced that, was a Houston, Texas rapper related to the singer, right? It has now been confirmed that he is definitely related to her, and he was found fatally shot in his apartment. Police have now issued a warrant for the arrest. Hold on. All right. For the arrest of one Sasha Scare. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing that, but anyway, who was confirmed as a murder suspect. It is worth noting that this is not the 21-year-old's first run-in with the law. Back in 2019, she was also charged with an assault linked to the shooting death of her boyfriend. San Antonio-based musician was widely known in his area as Beyonce's cousin through her maternal grandmother, Agnes Deroyan, I don't know how to pronounce that, who Tina Knowles' fashion line, House of, Deroyan was named after. Forgive me. His Spotify bio reads, in the last few years, he's changed that narrative with his own musical pursuits. So I guess he was trying to, brandish himself outside of just being Beyonce's cousin, but nonetheless found himself dead at the hands of one young Sasha Scare, 21 years old, who apparently already shot a boyfriend previous. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there. I don't know if those are burn marks. I don't know if that's birthmarks. I don't know what it is. But I do know that look alone would have me leaving her the hell alone. But I'm not saying that to cast dispersions on the dead. Not doing that. I'm simply saying that these kind of things are happening, and we, as I've been saying, we tend to ignore them. We tend to act like they're not happening. And if anything, even amongst men, if you go to a YouTube video and you listen to black men, especially talking about cases like these, 9 times out of 10, they will start with everything he did wrong, everything he should have done right, everything he should have known. And I'm not critiquing that. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm saying that's what happens. I don't often find that the case when I find scores of women talking about situations like this. Again, the very first response I'm used to hearing from women in a case like even this is, what did he do to her? Men more often than not start with critiquing other men. I rarely hear that amongst women. And if it's a mixed exchange between men and women, I find that women tend to support each other even when they know that somebody is dead wrong, that a woman in the equation is dead wrong. They'll call men out for being wrong, and so will men. Women, usually the first gesture is to protect her. Now, that's not to say that there won't be individual women that will bring a critique, but I'm just saying more often than not, the trend in these kind of dialogues tends to be very repeatable and predictable. Men start with critiquing everything this guy should have done right, and then they get around to her being crazy, and then they go back to what he should have known. Women usually start out defending her, humanizing her, and they don't usually budge from that position. We have got to learn how to change how we talk about abuse and intimate partner homicide beyond just the same tropes we've been using, because they don't work and they don't explain the kind of things we're seeing more and more of, and we will continue to see in the midst of the economy we're living in. Right? All right. This is an article that you will be able to find. Oh man, I didn't put the I think this was, oh yeah, this is from news.gallup.com. Okay, thought I didn't put it there. Single moms struggling worldwide, particularly in the US. Right? A couple of bullet points of the article. Almost half of single mothers worldwide, 44%, struggled to afford food in the past year. In the US, 40% of single mothers struggled to afford food, 27% could not afford shelter. Right? World Gallup finds that the single mothers are more likely than the rest of the population to be struggling to put food on their table and shelter over their head. For example, across 148 countries, 44% of single women age 18 to 60 with children younger than 15 in their household, a proxy for single mothers, say they have been that they have had trouble, right, affording food, right? That they have had trouble affording food. Randolph, appreciate the support in the Cash App. So this is what we're looking at. As a matter of fact, this is the chart that came with it that you might, I'll enlarge it again. There you go. Right. Single moms worldwide struggling to afford food. And you can see that Africa, right, tops the chart in sub-Saharan Africa, 65%. So the question asked is, have there been times in the past 12 months when you did not have enough money to buy food that you and your family needed? Sub-Saharan African, 65% of single women with children in the household said yes, there have been times. All other residents said 61% said yes, so they were more than all other residents, right? So there's a 4% gap. In the United States, 43% single women, children with children in the household said that they couldn't afford food against all other residents at 39%, right? So essentially what we're finding is that, the U.S. tends to be much higher than we thought in regard to being able to support children, right? And single mothers most particularly, you know. So now, of course, this is exacerbated again by the current economy. But I think part of this is also in relation to where we've seen this redefinition of family coming out of the West and really beginning to expand. Now, we also know Africa is dealing with a whole lot of issues. There are still neo-colonial issues at play, economies that are still tied to the former European countries that colonized them. So there's a lot of factors going on when you talk about continental Africa and sub-Saharan issues. There's a lot going on there. There's more than just what's reported on in this article. But at the end of the day, one of the things I notice, particularly in the West, is when you have this redefinition of family, one of the most consistent tropes is that men are not necessary. Men are almost like an accessory that makes you look good, but they're not necessary. And if anything, they can be an impediment to your own advancement as a woman. Well, what then is the long-term impact of that culturally and societally if men, boys even, are taught from an early age that they are disposable and unnecessary? And girls are taught that boys are disposable and unnecessary, men in particular as well. What is the long-term impact of that, especially when the economy starts to crash? And you have all of these single mothers with children who were told that they didn't need husbands. They didn't need partners. All they really needed was sperm. What's the long-term impact of that, right? The other thing I would say about articles like this is they have a way of of kind of dismissing and overlooking the degree to which men struggle. They downplay it and they dismiss it altogether. See, one of the things they keep focusing on in this article is this question of women with children. And you'll notice how often they say it, because that's a way of being able to deflect from how difficult, the situation is actually for men. They don't want to talk about that. Again, when I talk about Black males, I've been saying this religiously for the last year, right? In over 35 major cities, Black males are unemployed at rates between 40 and 50%, major urban environments. And that was pre-COVID. Homelessness rates for Black men is through the roof, especially when you factor in incarceration. And even if they have if they have housing vouchers, people will not honor them. So the numbers for men, again, and that goes for men across the board. Rates of homelessness are generally much higher for men, but we don't talk about that. We accept it as a norm. So now that we're in a situation where we're seeing more single mothers struggling, and they need help, and of course they do. Not arguing they don't, but I'm saying that part of the argument is being made in a manner by really kind of deflecting from what men struggle with. So from unemployment to homelessness rates, men across the board tend to find themselves worse off. So you have this weird kind of dynamic, right? Where men tend to be way more impoverished. And on the top end, they tend to make more. Women tend to circulate in the middle stable areas more often than not. And we're seeing a drop in that stability because of the pandemic and the economy that's come with it. But as that drop is taking place, the men that were already beneath those women, what do you think happens to them? How many articles are written on that? See, what we get is articles about homelessness, right? At best, but they're not gendered. The only time they're gendered, right, is when they speak to women. So we naturally assume that whatever else is happening in the background is irrelevant. It must be acceptable because nobody's talking about it. That's a problem. And it's something we have to learn to deal with in a much different way. Okay. We're going to have to learn to deal with that. So that said, let me quickly shout a couple of things out before we go ahead and transition here and deal with a couple of things. Appreciate that support, Cormega. Appreciate the support, Nigel. All right. So please support the channel. Y'all know the deal. We are trying to do things here. And one of the things I want you to also support is the Institute for Black Male Studies. It is definitely in need of support. But also, I mentioned earlier the documentary being done by my colleague, Green Gorilla. So make sure you support it, and you can check out the commercial here.
I told you to do Biden. Yeah, we done lost a damn vote. We done lost a vote. That's gonna go to Trump. God damn.
I mean, when you mention Black people, you mentioning Black women. So don't count yourself out.
No, that's not true.
Look for the crowdfunding on Indiegogo.com for the documentary, the White People of Black People. Okay. So again, make sure you support. All right. And again, go to the Institute for Black Male Studies. Again, that is www.instituteforblackmalestudies.com. And you can either support by donating to the Patreon. You can see at the bottom of my page if you're on YouTube. If not, the Patreon is patreon.com/THJohnson. And you can donate through there to the Institute. You can also support by, as I said earlier, going to the merchandise section of the Institute's website, and you can find all kinds of apparel. You can find everything from postcards to posters to mugs and backpacks and shirts and sweaters and hats and the whole deal, with all kinds of things on them that I think you might enjoy. So please give that a look, support that. Most particularly our recent shirts on the Black Brotherhood Commandments and Black Fatherhood is the Cure. So please make sure you support, because we definitely need it. We are not funded by any entity. This is all being done independently so that we can maintain our own voice and not be told or cajoled into saying what others find comfortable, but speaking truth about what actually is going on with Black males. Okay, so straight up, please make sure you support that to the best of your ability. All right, so let's get to it. Right, attacking the Black male image. Now, this came from a couple of different things. A couple of things that kind of all collided all at once in this last few days, at least in my head. You know, semester started, I'm teaching, and I'm reading these kind of articles that I'm sharing with you every day. So this stuff is always bouncing around in my head, and I start to see things that, sometimes I feel like I'm the only one seeing them. And it really, you start to wonder, like, what the hell? How is it that so many people are oblivious to the kind of things we see going on, particularly with Black males, right? But I want to be clear. The reason I do this, because I remember a colleague of mine asked me a few months ago. She said, "Well, why are you doing this? This, you seem like you're just trying to hurt people. You don't care about the Black community." It's actually quite the opposite. My argument is, if there's going to be a community, and if there's going to be a Black family that's going to survive, at some point, we have to come to terms with the treatment of Black males, the real treatment, not the treatment based in stereotype, not the treatment based in anecdotal stories. No, we actually have to look to the data, and we have to actually look at the widespread experiences of Black men and boys. And when we do that, we often find a story that hasn't really been told in any mainstream circuit. So when people come in and they hear it for the first time, of course, the reaction is fairly predictable at this point, because there's so much critique brought to bear, especially on feminism and women, that it comes across as, oh, well, they hate women. No, I'm filling in the gaps in what you've not been told. See, one of the reasons that I don't do a whole lot of stories on, the crimes Black males commit is there's already a lot of sources for that. You don't really need me to tell you about that. You can get that from everywhere. I'm one of the small percentage of people that focuses on what's missing from the story. The goal is for you to balance the two, right? But so much of the time, Black males are hyper acknowledged for the mistakes and crimes they commit, whether they, and I'm not saying that they should be absolved of crimes, but I am saying that they already get the acknowledgement. Black men are held accountable to death, if not incarceration, even if innocent, right? Half the cases coming out of the Innocent Project are Black men who are found to be innocent of the crimes they've been committed that they have been accused of committing, and often have served decades in prison for already. Half of those, exonerate. So what I'm simply saying is that we have to actually be able to look at what exactly is going on with Black males beyond anecdote and beyond stereotype. What's up, Taji? D. Scott, what's going on? Right? We actually have to be able to go beyond stereotype to look at this. So the first thing that popped up, that I saw this week, that kind of came together in my head as far as the main topic, was this piece done on Halle Berry, right? And so Halle was talking about how what she does with her son is she challenges him on gender stereotypes, right? So her son, Maceo Martinez, what is it? I think I left out his age. He's still very young. She also has a 12-year-old daughter, but I want to say her son might be like 5. So, she says things like, she routinely asks him questions like, why is that for girls? Why is that a girl's color? At times the conversation, she says, can be painful, where she's asking him questions about what he believes. She says, I see how he's taught to feel like he's superior at 5 to girls. When those sentiments pop up, she asks him to follow up with questions like, why is that less than you? Barry's hope is that the conversations will compel her son not to take gender at face value. I've had to really break that down for him and give him a new perspective, she says, right? As for her son, whom she defended last April after she was criticized for wearing high-heeled white boots with his PJs during COVID's quarantine. Barry is confident their conversations will enable him to grow as a deep thinker on the subject. And my boy Niusi King, I may have mispronounced his name. He says the translation of this article is, I'm socializing my son to accept femininity as the only appropriate form of gender expression. I'm going to masquerade this as critical thinking. I agree wholeheartedly, right? Because the only way that's acceptable to be critical thinking about gender is to prioritize femininity and to downplay masculinity, to have boys and men question their masculinity while at the same time affirming what I would argue is a female superiority narrative. Because only females have gender, for one. So that's why there's a one-way critique. But in the other context, you got to get boys and men to question them. And the only way that you really can get them to question their masculinity is to have them appropriate what we call feminine qualities. In this kind of undermining attempt to dismantle what is believed to be a dichotomy, a divergent dichotomy between men and women. So the answer is for men to become more feminine. And the unspoken additional part of the answer is for women to become more masculine, right? It's not an accident that we see Halle Berry directing her first, I guess this is her first directorial debut, where she's playing a disgraced mixed martial arts fighter. Now, if you saw her in something like, oh goodness, what's the movie with Keanu Reeves she just recently played in? Someone in the chat help me out. This is the third movie in the series. John, what is it? My chat is moving slow. But I know somebody will. John Wick, right? John Wick 3, right? And the very first time you see her in the film, so John Wick comes into the room, he greets her, she shoots him in the chest, or at least somewhere. I forget where. I think it was in the chest. He has a bulletproof suit on, but so you have this idea that she's this uber violent, powerful being, which I would argue today is pretty common in film and media, right? And then of course they go see the big boss, and the big boss disrespects her, so she not only shoots him, she sicks her dog on him, and the dog chews on his genitalia. Yeah. And then from there proceeds to beat up 10, 20 men, twice her size, weight, strength, because whatever. This is common. I mean, it's a common trope. In the 80s, it was more a matter of the boys were doing their things, and now we're starting to see the girls doing their own separate things, right? Now it's way more about female superiority. Women are smarter, better, stronger, faster. I mean, they're bionic. They're beating people up left and right, kicking men through walls that are 3 times their body weight, simply because they're women. I mean, that's the narrative that we kind of see happening in a lot of these films. So when you look at someone like Halle telling her son to question his gender role and what he believes, I find it interesting that the answer seems to be masculinizing women and feminizing males. And I say males because I'm talking about boys and men. And we're not even going to get to whether or not men find these things, these tropes, to be tropes that tend to work when it comes to dating and mating. We're not even going to go there. No, I mean, I would argue they mostly don't, but nevertheless, I just find it questionable, right? That you have these kind of issues going on where boys are essentially being told to re-examine themselves from the bottom up, but only in a way where they're urged to mimic girls, right? And we're living in an era where boys don't even see boys effective at anything, especially when it comes to dealing with girls, right? That's why I told you, my son is 15 now, but up to the age of 12, and I haven't asked him recently, but that was the last time I asked him, have you ever seen a boy or a man in media beat a girl or a woman at anything? He said, never. They're never smarter than women. They're never stronger than women. They're never faster than women. They're never more capable than women. They don't make better decisions. Most of the time, especially if it's a family situation, they're the butt of the joke. They're laughable. They're dismissible. They're buffoons. They're incapable. And they often need to be rescued. Whether it's not being able to cook a meal for kids or whether it's staving off violence. If you've watched the last series with Regina King on The Watchmen, right? You had this narrative where you got this stay-at-home father and his wife has to constantly come home and rescue him from physical issues, even though he is really the most powerful being in the universe as far as we know. But this is standard now, right? And so this is one of the things that really kind of stood out this week, and you'll see how they kind of connect to the other things. I mean, many of you have heard about this Chad Wheeler case with his black girlfriend, right? This particular article you guys can find on what is this? Atlanta Black Star. You know, this particular one. I'm gonna try and sum it up because there's a lot here, and there's a lot here that in this article that I didn't hear when this case first broke. Right? Current status. The article's title is "The Current Status Places My Safety at Risk." Former Seahawks lineman Chad Wheeler ordered to remain under house arrest despite request from black girlfriend. Wheeler, 27, accused of strangling his 27-year-old Kent Washington girlfriend until she passed out twice during a January 22nd domestic assault after she refused to bow to him. So, long story short, apparently he had some kind of manic episode. He had a psychotic break of some sort, and she noticed it because he texted her earlier in the day, and I guess he had cut off all his hair, so she knew something was wrong and that he, quote unquote, snapped into a dark space, right? So she went back to the house where he was, and he was acting very, manic. He was all over the place. Her sister got to be very worried about her, but she just kept saying, I got to stay here. I got to calm him down, until he snapped and choked her a couple of different times, and she passed out. And at one point he thought she was dead. And when she kind of came to, he said in a very, matter of fact, cold kind of way, "Oh, you're still alive." Right? She contacted his father. She hid in the bathroom, eventually calling the police. Police came in, and he had her in a bear hug by the time they did. Took several officers to wrestle him down because he was so much stronger than them. Of course, it was difficult for them to kind of get him managed. They finally strapped him down altogether, and she was rescued. But she had suffered a number of different things. I believe I read earlier she had a broken nose. But she had, I think I might have, because I only pulled segments out of this article, but she definitely had his fingerprints in her neck. And he had choked her a couple of times until the capillaries burst in the back of her throat. Said she was having trouble eating after that. So here it is. She had a broken nose, fractured humerus bone, and dislocated elbow that will require her to undergo orthopedic surgery. Yeah, that's what she's dealing with. So apparently she was 5'9", 145 pounds, or she is. He's 6'7", 310 pounds, and he snapped. CTE? I don't know, maybe. Apparently he had some kind of episode prior to that I think she found out about. I don't think is while he was with her, but either way, she felt she could be there to handle it. Now, the only reason I bring this up is not only to just, kind of point out that this has occurred, but shout out to my boy Sean James. You can find him on YouTube. He did a video where he talked about the women that basically argued that black men were somehow responsible. So it's interesting, when black men are the abusers, they're responsible. When black men are abused, they're responsible. As I said earlier, people ask, well, what did he do to deserve it? But when there ain't a black man in the picture, they're still responsible. Because you remember the trope, right? We don't protect anybody. But every week when I read you guys the cases for the sacred black masculine, there's always a brother who is sacrificing himself for others. But somehow we're not responsible. I mean, we are responsible, forgive me, right? This is what tends to go on over and over again, even though black males had nothing to do with the situation. I forgot the name of the of the athlete, because there was a brother who I believe was in the NFL who actually wanted to fight this gentleman. Yolanda, thank you for the support on the Cash App. I missed the other name. I apologize, but thank you for the support as well, sir. But yeah, so this is what we're looking at, right? Black men are somehow hyper responsible even when they're not even present. Yeah. So again, this was the second of a couple of things that kind of hit me. And I'll tell you how they all kind of came together in my head after a minute. This was another. Oh, well, sorry. No, this was just an excuse to show this shit. That was, yeah, I'll let y'all soak that in for a minute. And this is not about maligning her. She didn't say this, Chad Wheeler's girlfriend, whom Atlanta Black Star left her name out on purpose to protect her identity. I think I've seen her name in other reports, but you know, I go with Atlanta Black Star on it. I don't need to say her name. But the point being, this was nonetheless how it was received. And to my knowledge, people were telling me that this was on Tariq Nasheed's channel. I'm wondering who's making them, because I've been seeing a series of these and they've been hilarious. But so I'm showing this not to suggest that she made this argument. I don't know if she did. I don't think she did, but others did. Right? Other Black women made the argument that more needed to be done somehow by Black men to protect her and women like her. Right? So this idea that Black men need to support and protect women who are actively involved in violent interracial relationships with white men, especially if they invoke some kind of, slave narrative in their sex play and it gets violent. Somehow this is Black men's fault. But the other thing was an article by one Dr. James Thomas Jones. You can catch Green Gorilla. He did a show yesterday where he talked at length about this. I'm not going to. Suffice it to say, because Green Gorilla already broke it down, I would urge you to listen to his video. But the major point that he and I are in agreement about, Green Gorilla and Green Gorilla, if you don't know, is also referred to as the G with the PhD. I know him personally. He does have a PhD. He is a scholar. He's a brilliant philosopher. So it's not just someone who called himself a PhD. Nonetheless, he and I agree on this particular piece. And basically what we're saying is this article, this blog written by Dr. James Jones III, argues that it's time for Black men to apologize to Black women. And he entitles it that with a subtitle reading, "One Black Man's Response to a Dear Friend's Assertion." So basically, long story short, he has a conversation with a female friend of his, and she made the argument that Black men owe Black women an apology. And much later, he reflects on this, even though he didn't agree at the time, and now he magically agrees. And he bases that argument on the fact that there are men that do bad things to women. Doesn't point out what they are, doesn't point out any statistics about to what extent, doesn't point to anything really beyond, not even anecdote. It's really a general reference to anecdotes. That's about as deep as it got. Black men do bad things. And because of that, we need to apologize to Black women. So I'm looking at the Halle piece, and I'm looking at what she and others like her, like Charlize Theron, the actors, right, what they're doing to their boys, their Black boys. They're suggesting that their Black boys need to somehow subvert masculinity because masculinity is the problem, right? Right. And then we go to the Chad Wheeler case where somehow Black men are responsible, even if there's no Black man present, not even involved in the situation. Black men are somehow still responsible. And then I come across this piece about how we need to apologize to Black women because some Black men do bad things. Yeah. Very cherry-picked notions, like, the quote by Malcolm, the Black woman is the most disrespected person on the planet. It's funny to me when I see people quote that. I'm like, do you really want to start quoting Malcolm? Really? Because there's a whole lot you missing out. If you can condense Malcolm X's entire life as a teacher and as a speaker, as a leader, if you can reduce it to the Black woman is the most disrespected person on the planet, you have profoundly missed a lot of what else he brought to the table. And he brought a lot, even in the context of gender. See, it's convenient for you to cherry pick this one sentence, but he had a lot to say about black men and black women. I find it suspect that you can like this line so much, but you don't quote nothing else. He would have a field day talking about what's going on today in regard to gender. Because even back in the 60s, he had a lot to say about black women's behavior and women in general. And was actually very reflective and analytical about it. I mean, the man lived in the same building as prostitutes at one point in time and would have casual conversations about their observations regarding men and women. And so he had all kinds of critiques. So critiques that came from the vantage point of the Nation of Islam doctrine, critiques that came from his experiences dealing with everyday people on the street. He had all kinds of perspectives, and many of them would probably ruffle your feathers if this is the only thing you can get out of Malcolm's life. But nonetheless, Dr. James invokes Malcolm's statement, doesn't provide any context to it, doesn't provide any evidence of it. Again, the assertion is black men do bad things. And the last of the four things that bled into my head this last few days, right? So we got Hallie, what she's doing with her son. We got Chad Wheeler and how black men are somehow responsible. We got, we got Dr. James and this question of black men apologizing. And then we get to this. Yeah, we're finally here. Then we get to this. Salt and Pepper, the Lifetime movie. Now, I entitled this today's show, as y'all know, Attacking the Black Male Image, False Accusations, Maligning, and Emasculation, just for the purposes of addressing the different streams of thought regarding black men that all seem to meld together in the last few days. And the reason I say that is it didn't just meld together in my head. They were all consistent about one simple thing. Black men were the problem, right? Halle Berry, in many ways, as a black woman, she's identified herself as such, right? Her problems with gender weren't limited to men. She was talking very much about black men too, and somehow our hyper masculinity, right? And then you get to the Chad Wheeler thing, and now there's this this kind of under the table subconscious notion that black men are just not protecting, whether it's because of cowardice or whether it's because they just don't know how to care, right? And then you get to this idea that we need to apologize, even though there's nothing clearly stated about what exactly black men did. And then we get to this, right? Now, these kind of Lifetime movies have been a problem for a while. And I don't know if they're all necessarily Lifetime, but they all seem to have the same trope. Because I remember there was the Aaliyah film. The TLC film, I think, was one of the only films that I walked out on, which is interesting to say because I was watching it in my house. And I indeed walked out of my damn house because of how bad that movie was. But I'm not talking bad just about the acting. I mean, you're not getting award-winning actors. Mostly they're up and coming. And I ain't mad at that. People getting their career started, whatever, cool. But so I'm not talking about how bad the acting is. In many instances it was. But beyond that, I'm talking about the portrayal of black men in particular. Now, this movie is a little different than something like the TLC movie. And there have been many of these movies, right? About black female entertainers that have been abused and beaten by black men at every turn. And of course, the narrative at the end is always the same. They find solace with other women, and they join together like Voltron. And that way they're able to fight off the stem of the tide of these, toxic monster men who are coming at them from all sides simply because they exist, right? I mean, it's a pattern that we've seen going all the way back to the early 1980s with Color Purple. It hasn't changed. It's the same pattern. What I found interesting about this one, though, is this was actually directed by Mario Van Peebles, who plays the pastor in the movie. And I like Van Peebles overall. I like the legacy of his family's work. From his father Melvin's movie, starting with Sweetback's Badass Song. And I particularly like Mario Van Peebles' film about the making of his father's film, Sweetback. I've loved that film as well. It's called Sweetback. Definitely see it if you haven't. Powerful film about what his father made and the cultural impact it had. and the risks he took to make it. And since then, he's been upholding his father's, mission. Hell, it's a third through the film. I saw one of the younger Van Peebles, right? And that's the thing. In any of Mario Van Peebles' works, you will always see another Van Peebles in the project. And they have such a distinct look. You don't even have to look up the name. It's not even, it might not even been a third, it might have been a quarter into the movie. I didn't look up how they were related, but I was like, ain't no question in the world you are a Van Peebles. All right. So Mario was in the movie, but he also had another younger family member, and he's always bringing in younger family members into it, just like the Wayans. Both groups do a pretty good job of incorporating their families into whatever they're doing. And I'm not mad at that. I applaud it. Get their career started. I would argue that Mario may have been the reason why this film wasn't as bad in terms of its perspectives on Black men as like the TLC film was and others. Right. One of the things I noticed, we'll get to that in a minute. So in this film, of course, they talk about the origin and the rise of Salt and Pepper, this, uber famous Black female rap duo, how they met. They met on the job, or really in school, but also on the job at Sears, where they worked with, do I even have to say spoilers? Y'all saw what the damn thumbnail to the video is. Anyway, but, they met at Sears, and they worked with who would become the future rap group Kid and Play, as well as comedian Martin Lawrence, right? They all worked together at Sears, taking phone calls and so on and so forth. And from there, Herbie Lovebug was boyfriend to Salt, right? Of Salt and Pepper. And basically, he had the vision, as Kid of Kid and Play said in a recent interview. Herbie had the vision no one else did about what they could be, what they could become. And his particular vision of Salt and Pepper was one that neither of the ladies saw themselves. Initially, he wrote their rhymes, choreographed how they dressed, the whole deal, organized their performances. And of course, at some point, he was the bad boyfriend to Salt, right? He cheats on her, he gets another woman pregnant. But what I found suspect about it is she went into his office to distance herself and the group from him and treated him as an oppressive force before anything came out about him cheating on her or any of these other things. It was real interesting. It was this interesting scene where she and Pepper had to come together to vanquish the evil Herbie Lovebug, and I'm saying, this is interesting. This is the common trope that I've seen over and over again, particularly in hip hop, right? Because you always hear Queen Latifah and MC Lyte and others saying, they had to make it into a boys club. They had to fight upstream in this all male environment. They had to fight for space where they were mistreated on the basis of being women, right? But one of the things I rarely see happen, and this is why I'm wondering if Mario had anything to do with this. They actually went to great lengths to show how much men contributed to the development and support of Salt and Pepper. I found that to be really interesting. And I never hear that when it comes to Roxanne Shante or, any of the other female artists. How many men wrote lyrics for them, got them on the shows, supported their careers? Hell, if you look at the first song that Salt and Pepper was known for, thanks to Herbie Lovebug, it was a response to Slick Rick and Dougie Fresh's show. Right? They did the song The Showstopper. It was on the backs of Slick Rick and Dougie Fresh that they built a name, which was the same thing that happened with Roxanne Shante and UTFO, right? And then Roxanne Shante hooks up with a number of brothers, that build up her career as well, that support her, I should say. I'm not taking anything away from what she brought to the table. And that's another film, the Roxanne Shante film, highly problematic in terms of its depiction of Black males. Black males are monsters across the board in these movies. But when it comes to hip hop in particular, but I mean, you can say this about R&B. I've seen some of the films made on R&B artists in the 70s and 80s, and it's the same trope. Black male monsters, right? Just beating up on women because they're there. It's like a video game. As soon as they come in the room, any woman that's there, they got to smack them and beat them and all of this kind of stuff. Even though, again, the rates of bidirectional intimate partner violence is the same, but somehow it's always one way. And another thing we don't see is the psychological or emotional abuse that is also bidirectional. So what you often see in these films is one-way violence. The women are coming in and they're floating on air and they're saying, "Oh dear, I made you dinner," and then he gets up and just beats her up, for no real reason. That's the kind of general narrative that you see in when it comes to these films' depiction of male aggressors in terms of IPV. Very one-dimensional, very superficial, and very patronizing and disrespectful. And Tretch, rapper Tretch, right, who we've known for years, was in a long-term and at one point married to Pepper, is depicted as this uber crazy dude that, is constantly yelling at her and beating on her because she doesn't put on her pants fast enough. But the problem with this is it doesn't show the bidirectionality of hostilities that tend to take place in these relationships, even before anything gets physical. It doesn't depict the men as actually being human and having any kind of engagement, with these women for any rational reason, right? It just, these kind of superficial depictions of Black male initiated violence and Black female innocence is so problematic and predictable and consistently it's repetitive and predictable at this point. I wasn't even going to watch this because I kind of expected everything that I saw. And if anything, it gets more and more frustrating to find out that I'm right. None of these men had any kind of human motivations. They just did shit. And the women, were anyway. They did show, some of the dysfunction between Salt and Pepper as a group and how their different philosophies and worldviews weighed in on each other negatively. They did show a little bit of that, but of course, the only true violation came from the men in their lives. And that's kind of the trope I saw in the TLC movie as well, right? Like the men are really the source of these women's problems. Even the children they had were a problem, mainly because the men got them pregnant. It's these kind of narratives that play out like that. Now, one thing I did find interesting, though, is there was a scene very early on in the film where you saw Salt and Pepper, or it was actually Salt talking to Herbie, and Herbie was saying, Pepper is not really a member of the group. She's just kind of almost like a contractor, and therefore she shouldn't be paid the same as you and I. Because I do the production and write the lyrics, and you're doing the lyrics, and you're the lead person, and Pepper is just a contractor. And so when they finally liberate themselves, a la Celie from The Color Purple, from Mr., in this case, and you could just, the men in these movies are interchangeable. You can go from Danny Glover as Mr. from The Color Purple to Herbie Lovebug, and you can just switch them in and out. It doesn't matter. They're just Black men. They're monsters. They're all the same. One had a farm, the other had a record company. It's all the same. Black men, monsters, right? But when they finally do liberate themselves from this Herbie Lovebug monster, right? The interesting thing about it is they go ahead and do the same thing that Herbie apparently was talking to Salt about doing, and she wasn't in disagreement. Salt did not argue the point. She accepted it. It advanced her position and left Pepper as less than. So they finally liberate themselves from Herbie. They're supposed to be on equal par. And even though Salt is doing most of the production and Pepper's this irresponsible artist, and Salt has to deal with Pepper's immaturity, but they turn around and they dismiss Spin. And for those who don't know, this is the second Spinderella, right? For the group, who started out at 16 years old DJing for Salt and Pepper, right? There was apparently another one, but they didn't say much about her in the film. But truth be told, they didn't say much about the second Spin either, who is, last I checked, she was still with the group. She's performed with them. She's been a consistent member, but they still treat that girl like she's a contractor. That woman, they treat her like she's sweeping the floor. It's a trip. But back to the film, you're absolutely right. That's another thing I noticed. When they introduce Spinderella in the film, right? One of the first things she says is, Herbie introduces her and says she's 16. And they're like, well, you're 16. I don't know if you're mature enough. Do you got the skill? And she says, oh, my man taught me how to DJ. And see, I listen to stuff like that. So I'm sitting there going, word? Interesting. I wonder how many men played a significant role in these women's entrance to hip hop and their ascendancy. And why don't they ever get acknowledged for that? The narrative becomes that she pulled herself up by her bootstraps all by herself and just predicated on her raw skill, became a legend in the game, fighting a mountain, a tidal wave, if you will, of sexist misogynists who wanted to see their decline and end. And then you find out these little tidbits on the side, like, oh, this guy did your production, and this guy wrote your lyrics, and this guy, I mean, hell, what is it? Play from Kid and Play even did their logo, the album cover, designed the jackets that they wore in that famous Push It video. I'm like, really? Play from Kid and Play did that? Oh, interesting. Why are these stories not central? So in this film, I will say they did kind of agree that, they did portray in this film the role some men played, which I rarely see in these movies. I was a little surprised by it, but I'm kind of tempted to give Mario Van Peebles a lot of that credit, right? And I'm saying that because I didn't see that in other films, that depicted these black men as nothing but monsters who were simply there to find new ways to hurt women and isolate them and alienate them. And that's another trope you generally see happen. They're there to keep them away from other women who would be empowering for them to deal with, right? So, it's one of these kind of forms of abuse where you isolate the victim from any kind of social support, right? And they kind of subtly, imply that this is what these oppressive men do. They keep the women from each other. And then again, at the end of the film, they form like Voltron and they can defend against all men. I'm just like, okay. I've been seeing these same kind of movies since I was a little kid, and I don't hear anybody say anything about it. And it's infuriating. It really is. But I never see that. So that was one of the interesting things about the film I did see. And there was a point where Mario Van Peebles plays Salt's pastor, and you can see her, Salt and Pepper, starting to separate from one another because Salt wants to party, be in the club, find men, and Pepper does, and Salt wants to really be this kind of Christian, kind of fairly conservative woman. She gets married after having been in a relationship with Herbie. She gets with a guy who's not necessarily in the business, and that that's a bit of an issue at some point. But she marries him, and they tend to stay together, and they work together, and whatnot. But Salt is still writing all these songs about getting a man. Anyway, it's a real interesting set of tropes that continues to occur, right? And so when I look at this, I see a number of tropes coming in. When I talked about Halle Berry, and I talked about her role in films like John Wick, and this current one coming out about her being a mixed martial artist, like these aggressive masculinizing roles to demonstrate that there really are no differences between men and women, right? I saw that even in this film, right, where Pepper knocks a guy out with one punch. And I'm not saying that didn't happen. I don't know. The girl was wild, so whatever. But it's not whether or not it happened. It's how it's portrayed, and that it's portrayed on screen that I found interesting, right? Now, there's another situation that occurs where Herbie is literally putting his life on the line to make sure that Salt and Pepper are able to build. And what do I mean? Well, after they release their song Showstopper, it's getting attention. People are starting to play it. And they go to a club and they find that one of the local hustlers, pimps, whatever. Matter of fact, this is the one played by Van Peebles' relative, Mario Van Peebles' relative. He has stolen the image of the group and recreated Salt and Pepper. And he has them on stage in a club performing the song, right? And the bouncer will not let Salt and Pepper in the club to represent themselves. So this was prior to them doing album covers. Nobody really knew what they looked like. And so this guy is actually taking advantage of that. And he's, building off the Salt and Pepper brand by replacing them with two people that he decided to replace them with. And you get that earlier on. He meets the real Salt and Pepper earlier. He's very happy to meet them. He takes their picture, but he uses the picture to recreate the group, right? So Herbie sneaks in the club, gets on stage at risk of his own life, and tells the audience that this is all a sham. And so he ends up getting chased by a group of men, right? Salt actually apparently tried to jump in, and she was talking about, I'm from Brooklyn, I can fight, and then she got knocked out with one punch. And then they proceeded to handle Herbie. But I found it interesting because I'm like, okay, so like 15 minutes later, Herbie is presented as this monster that's manipulating him and exploiting him, and they got to get away from him. But he's literally putting his life on the line to make sure that Salt and Pepper get the credit for their work that he's fighting for them to get. And then the other interesting component to it is when they determine that he's manipulating, most particularly Pepper, and manipulating her in terms of her contract, right? He's exploiting both of them, but especially Pepper, right? Pepper finds this out by apparently having some kind of relationship to MC Hammer's brother. And MC Hammer's brother is constantly trying to teach her about the business of hip hop. He's telling her how many points she should be getting, what her contract should be looking like. And of course, nobody's told her any of this, right? And so then and then he disappears. He just disappears. So the whole film from there is Salt and Pepper fighting alone against this oppressive Herbie Lovebug. And when they finally get rid of him, he tries to sue them and they have to fight him in court. And, it's very much, like the Angela Bassett moment from, not Stella. What's the other film? The other Terry McMillan film they did, Waiting to Exhale, right? It's this kind of court moment where she's, again, Michael Beach plays the monster in that. You can just, like I said, they're all replaceable. They're the same character over and over again. So she has to fight that against Herbie in court this time and all of that. But MC Hammer's brother just disappears, never comes back. Taught her the game, taught her what to look for, taught her how to. And again, in other movies, I don't even see those moments happen. So I was surprised to see it, even though those characters pop in for a minute, do something incredibly sacrificial, good, and then disappear. And the narrative just becomes about how brilliant these women are and how monstrous the rest of the men are. And yet at every turn, there are men going out their way to help them in some way, shape, or form. And I wonder how much hip hop history, especially regarding the rise of Black women in hip hop, does this and follows the same trope. I wonder. Or to what extent are the problems that some women may have initiated in hip hop overlooked? Anybody ever look up Roxanne Shanté's role in the whole push, especially on the West Coast under Dr. Dre, with this whole misogynist, bees ain't shit kind of thing? How many of us saw that video? It was a DJ Vlad interview, right, with Roxanne Shante, and he asks her, did you have any role with the B words ain't shit dynamic that happened? And she was like, well, she has this kind of guilty smile, and she apparently did a song first saying that N words ain't S, right? Apparently she started it. But even at the time, I didn't hear that because I didn't really hear the song. I heard Dre's response, right? So I look at this kind of thing and I'm saying, at what point are we going to have an honest conversation about just how Black men and women, even in terms of gender relations, engage one another? And to what extent are we going to begin to challenge this one-dimensional perspective on both Black men and women? Because the one-dimensionality as far as Black men is that we're monsters. The one-dimensionality as far as Black women is that they're, these sacrificial angels struggling and that, everybody's just out to get them. Like, word? Is that what everybody's trying to do? Okay. Right. Matter of fact, there was another figure. His name was JP. I think he was supposed to be a relative of Herbie's, but I think they called him Uncle at one point. He was an older gentleman, and he was helping with Salt and Pepper. And at a particular point, when Herbie didn't show up to the studio, and they had studio time that was being left over, he sat and talked with Salt and motivated her and built her up about, helping her develop the confidence to start producing without Herbie. But again, I don't see that role played out in other films. So I'm really, like I said, I'm looking at Mario and I'm like, I wonder if you had a hand in this. I probably really should also look at the writer. But I found it interesting, right? Because JP, as his name was, sat her down and motivated her to create the song Express Yourself. Not that he made the song, but she was getting ready to leave because Herbie wasn't there in the studio that night. And he was trying to say, look, you've been here, you've done this, you know enough to start producing. Make a song yourself, right? But that doesn't happen because black men don't support black women. Black men don't protect black women. Black men are only out here to get what they can get. So even within the context of the film, you saw repeated examples of black men who did more than that. And I would suggest that, the nature of history is such that there was probably way more than that. Now, they did say that Peppa was plagued by the early death of her father and that may have played a role in her relationship to men. Apparently, she was also suicidal. And at one point was getting ready to slit her wrists, right? I think that was after she and Tretch broke up. But each one of them had to endure black monsterism, right? So Salt's baby daddy apparently was jealous and, was frustrated at Salt and couldn't handle her success and was worried about, not being in the business because he was just a regular person. So he was worried about whether he was insecure about whether or not he was significant enough to be with her. Tretch was abusive and controlling. Neither Salt nor Pepper had any good men around them when they grew up. Pep says that her father died early on, and she was worried about whether or not she could live up to his expectations. He wanted her to go to school. Interesting. Wanted her to go to school, but apparently it was all for his own purposes. Couldn't be because he loved her. And then Salt's was a raging alcoholic. Her father. That's all she says. That's all we know about him. So one died, one's a raging alcoholic, and then all the rest of the men in the film are a problem. And they actually have to go so far. Salt has to say, I ain't scared of Herbie no more. I'm like, okay. They didn't exactly show Herbie smacking her around. I don't know if there was any physical abuse there. Some of y'all probably do, whether there was or there wasn't. But they made it a part of the trope, the narrative, which is consistent for these films, that he needs to be something that they have to survive. They have to survive. Right? So Herbie becomes this villainous figure. And then at the reunion concert toward the end, where Salt and Pepper hadn't spoke in a couple of years, but they're expected to perform on stage together, and they did. The performance went flawlessly. They did well, right after an introduction by Queen Latifah about, how much sexism women in hip hop had to deal with and how much they struggled to get to where they are. After that introduction, they come out and they do well. And they kind of rebond in a particular kind of way because both of them are incapable of really kind of succeeding without the other, so there's this underlying, trope that they're not at their best unless they're connected. And men are always kind of in the way of that connection. Appreciate the support, Isaac. Right. So basically that's the dominant narrative. And even though they're forced to come together in this performance, because neither one of them's career could really advance without the other, coming together does them good, and they, reconnect from there. No word on Spin, by the way. That was kind of interesting. But, and I think technically she might have been there, but they didn't really play her character up. And then the film's been getting critiqued for that, right? Spin herself was quite pissed off at this. But, one of the other tropes that I saw was something that they kept saying repeatedly throughout the film. Started with Peppa saying it, but it kept happening. So Peppa's on her first date with Tretch, and she takes him up to this bungee cord, ride or whatever, and jumps off this high post or whatever. But she says something I thought was interesting. She looks at Tretch and she says, "Can you handle this crazy? Can you handle this crazy?" You know what? I might even go so far as renaming this damn video, "Can You Handle This Crazy?" because I should have named it that. But that was a running theme in the film, right? And it was a question posed to Black men about dealing with these women, while at the same time, these men were being depicted as monsters. Yeah. While they're being depicted as monsters, they're being asked, can you handle this crazy? And I found that interesting. So I'm like, okay, so there's been no female initiated violence against any of the men. Okay. Okay. Curious. I mean, there was one scene where Peppa has this boyfriend for a while. He's a baller. He's in the club. He's in the, people know him in the streets, apparently. I didn't write down his name. He may have been more significant than that. Y'all might know. Like I said, I wasn't planning to watch it. I just kind of did. I don't know. I was like, all right, it's late. I need to watch something. I couldn't go to sleep. So I saw it was on and I watched it. But anyway, she kind of gets pregnant. They're not together in any significant way, really, but they're having a lot of sex. And she gets pregnant and she comes to him and she says, oh, I'm pregnant. And he kind of goes, And then from there, of course, he's depicted as this monster who gets her pregnant and, is too irresponsible to handle his children or whatever responsibilities. But nobody asked him if he wanted a child, for one. And it doesn't seem like there's any question about the role of contraceptives, but it all kind of comes down to it's his fault because he got her pregnant. She wanted to have the baby. He was either too immature or too monstrous to see the value of that and disappears. No discussion whatsoever. And again, that's one of the things we've seen very consistently in Black relationships depicted in media. No real analytical kind of approach to why Black men feel the way they feel in a given situation. Why a Black man feels the way he feels. There's no humanity, right? So if you deal with a female character in a film like this, right? She can have the child and it's humane. She can have an abortion and there's a humane reason. She could give the baby up for adoption and there's a humane reason. She can have more than one kid from a guy who doesn't love her and there's a humane reason. Her humanity is bolstered regardless of the decision she makes. The only decision that allows a Black male any modicum of humanity is if he's supportive of what she wants. So if she wants an abortion and he's supportive, he's a good man. He's progressive. If she wants to have the baby, even though they barely know each other, or he doesn't want to marry her, or he doesn't feel great about the relationship, as long as he supports her wanting to have the baby, and of course supports the baby, he's a good man. He's progressive. That's the narrative, right? And you get a little pat on the head for being a good boy, and then they never see you again in the course of the film. But that's the measure of what it means to be a good man. Do you affirm what she wants? Because you're not supposed to have any issues or desires or viewpoints that counter hers or just differ from hers. You're not allowed to have a perspective, especially a perspective that's actually rooted in your own humanity. You're not allowed to have it. You just need to concur. And if you don't concur, you're a monster. And don't worry, there are plenty of other monsters to secure that you're not alone. So you're one of several monsters she has to endure to find peace within herself and success in love and life. And that love and life does not come with any kind of relationship with a man, really, because even Salt was married, but they didn't really play up her relationship with her husband. It was really her relationship with Salt. So again, that's the narrative, right? That's the narrative. Women have to come together without men to find the utmost in who they can be. They have to prioritize career over family, and they have to prioritize other relationships with women over their men. And that is the formula to success. I say that's the legacy of feminism and its impact on Black communities and Black families. The dehumanization of Black manhood and Black males, and even in the narrative storytelling of these women's stories, and the purposeful expulsion of men from the story when convenient. Once they've served their tenure as monster, they have to then be eliminated from the film. No reflection on their humanity whatsoever. Can a man have a good reason for not wanting to father a child with a woman he's not married to? Not in a movie. And in real life, not in any kind of pop cultural way, not in any way that accesses the mainstream. Men can talk to each other about their reasons, and we experience all the time how we can have reasons for not wanting to father a child with a given woman, but not in pop culture, not in mainstream culture, and not in Black film. She is the measure of your progressiveness. She is the measure of your humanity, and just contradicting her is cause for your elimination from the narrative. You only get to stay if you follow. And I, for one, am sick of this depiction of Black men as either monsters or footstools who have no spine, who have no worldview, who have no humanity to bring to bear, to say anything that might break from convention and display a humanity, even if it's not a humanity that people like, but at least it's one we could understand. But we're fine with that one-dimensional performance and presence of Black men. And as I said before, even if you watch these films in on something like BET, right, or TV One, you know, they prioritize a Black female audience. So in order to do that, you have to present Black men as a problem, not complicated. See, that's one of the things that came up in my conversation, my interview with Kevin Samuels early last week. We talked about Black men being complicated. I'm not saying Black men are all complicated. I'm saying when a Black man is complicated. And in that context, we were talking about having what I call the foot in different worlds, right? You might be in the corporate world. You may also be in the street. You may also be in the church. You may be, you know, but you're complicated if you have a foot in different worlds. And I really was examining whether or not media, even Black media, could actually engage something as simple as that. I'm calling it complex, but I'm really saying it isn't. It's just real, because we all have a foot in different worlds on one level or another. But can that multi-dimensional representation be brought to bear in a way that complements Black men's humanity? I've seen very few examples of it. I've seen a few, and I talked about that a few weeks ago when I identified which films I regarded as Black masculinist films. It's not because they were pro-Black male and the Black male came in and beat up everybody and didn't have any problems. And no, it's because they depicted Black male humanity in more than just a one-dimensional narrative. They problematized the very idea of one-dimensionality when it comes to the depiction of Black men. And even if he's a damn villain, you can at least get a narrative, a story that tells you why, in a way that doesn't mean you have to agree with him, but at least helps you understand him. That I find makes a tremendous difference. And I'll be honest with you, I like villains that can be understood even if you disagree with them. I love those kind of villains. They complicate things. That's one of the reasons I like MF Doom as a rapper. You know, I like those kind of stories. And then there's plenty of examples, but I'm afraid the only one popping in my head right now is not from a Black film. This is one of my favorite classic villains because you understand him. You ever watch that movie Amadeus in the early 80s? If you ain't seen Amadeus, go check that out. Interesting film. I think it's F. Murray Abraham plays the villain, and he plays a guy who is successful. He's a successful musician, plays for royalty, has a high-level administrative position in the city as a musician of note. And then a young Amadeus comes along that is tapped into, by his own assessment, tapped into God with a gift that he's never seen before. And so the whole film, he's trying to undermine Amadeus to his grave, even wants to steal some of his work. So after he's dead, he can be loved and adored the way Amadeus was. But here's the thing. Throughout the entire thing, the one thing he can't lie about is how beautiful Amadeus's music is. So much so that even though he's trying to undermine him in every way possible, he attends every single concert Amadeus does because the music is that beautiful to him. Another movie that comes to mind, again, it's not a black movie, I apologize, but I remember watching Zorro with Antonio Banderas, right? And in that movie, is they have the villain. He's a Spaniard. He's fighting Zorro, who's played by Anthony Hopkins and all of that. But the thing that I found interesting is he was in love with Zorro's wife. And when she's accidentally killed by one of his own soldiers, the first thing he does is he kills the soldier that accidentally shot her. Now, he's a villain, so he steals their baby and takes the baby to Spain and raises the baby as his own daughter. He doesn't rape her, he doesn't violate her, other than the fact that he kidnaps her and says that he's her father, right? But the reason he did it was because of how in love he was with her mother. He's not right. You don't agree with him, but you understand that everything he does is out of a love he has for a woman that loves someone else. See, I like villains like that. And if you're going to make a black man a villain, can he at least be a villain that you can understand? But see, black men don't get that. We're just villains. We're backdrops for other people, right? So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and kind of close it off here. And I'm going to open up. We're going to do a very short kind of, office hours for my members. Now I'm going to get in and chop it up a little bit more about this and get some feedback. But I just wanted to share with you my thoughts on a couple of these things, because again, the connections for me in looking at how all of these things come together, right? From what we see with Halle Berry to what we see with this Chad Wheeler situation, to what we see with this professor telling us that black men need to apologize, to what we see depicted in these Lifetime films that monsterize black men. It's the same thing at its core. It reinforces black inhumanity, black male inhumanity. Anti-black misandry is another way to put it. It prioritizes that to humanize others and use as a deflection or a rationale for what others get to do to define their humanity. And that becomes a problem in and of itself. So that said, I can't support it. And I challenge you to look at these films, or don't, but if you don't, do it as a sign of protest. But if you do, critically analyze them and talk about them and break them down until we can actually have these critiques be heard. But more than that, have young men be able to understand the way they're being depicted. And I want the older brothers to do that, because look how long it took for us to come to this kind of point where we could understand this. Let's not have the younger men spend 20, 30 years trying to figure the shit out either. Let's give them the game so that they know coming out the gate how they're seen and how they're treated. Because we had to learn the game the hard way, just like our fathers did. It's time we share it so we can take some of that time off of them and they can learn this earlier. Because ain't nobody really trying to stop this. They're really not. So as I said, we're going to have an office hours after the show. And I will give me about 5 minutes to set that up after I close out here. And speaking of which, y'all know how I do. Brothers, be reminded that we are not criminals by birth, perennial rapists, incapable intellects, man-children, sperm donors, child support wellsprings, success objects, walking phalluses, ATM machines, lottery tickets, brainless henchmen, valueless assassins, pro bono mercenaries, unpaid bodyguards, interchangeable stepfathers, child discipline proxies, unpaid repairmen, workhorses, emotional tampons, or any other socially accepted dehumanizing stereotype. And I want you to remember that part. We are thinkers, inventors, innovators, leaders, fathers, warriors, and men. Embrace your humanity, know your worth, and extend your time, attention, and resources only to those who genuinely respect you. And remember, your worth is not defined by meeting other people's narcissistic, selfish, and unrealistic needs. You define your worth. Peace.